Welcome everybody to what is for us a very exciting occasion, the launch of the Southern Journal for Engineering Education. This has been a long time in the planning, and it's fantastic just to be able to bring you all together to be able to celebrate this launch. So a few little things before we start. My name is Brandon Collier-Reid. I'm on the board of SJEE and have been tasked with emceeing this particular program today. A few bits and pieces. We appreciate it if you can keep your mics muted unless you're wanting to talk. It just helps to keep the background noises down to a minimum. If you're wanting to have your cameras on, that's great. It means that we can see your faces. For some, it might be a bit of a challenge with bandwidth, or you might still be in your pajamas. You might not want to show us what your pajamas look like, and that's also okay. We've got people from across the world here this morning in South African time. It's wonderful to have you all with us. It's a privilege that we have you with us. We've got quite a packed program today. So what I'm going to do is firstly, I just want to show you what's coming. And what I've got on the screen now is a breakdown of how the day is going to go. And I'm going to use this opportunity just to highlight some of the features of Zoom. At the moment, if you've got us in gallery view, so you can see all the people on the screen, like often you do in a meeting, you'll see me as a tiny little picture with a tiny little bubble next to my head, and you won't be able to read anything. But if you double click on that picture, what it'll do is it'll expand it to full screen, and then my image will be the full screen, and you'll be able to see the slides that much better. And then you'll be able to see that we've got a welcome by Dr. Keith Jacobs coming up shortly, who's the president of SJEE at the moment. Followed by a breakout session. Now, the one thing about a virtual get-together or a virtual symposium like this is that actually we don't have the opportunity to be able to chat to people, get to know people, stop on the way in at registration table and sort of exchange pleasantries with the person next to you. So what we've got is we've got two sessions during the day today. One that's straight after Keith has spoken, where I'm going to artificially put you into a whole bunch of breakout rooms, 4 or 5 people in a room, which will just give you the opportunity to be able to meet somebody new in the engineering education space, somebody you probably haven't come across before, and get to know the community a little bit better. And we'll do that again just into the lunch break at 1 o'clock. It's quite a long day. It's a very packed program, so I don't want to spend too much time on the introduction. So what I'm going to do is very quickly now hand over to Keith. Keith will be followed by the breakout session. Then there'll be Bruce Clute will talk to the journal itself, and then I'll give you a quick overview of the SJEE website. Right, so first we've got Dr. Keith Jacobs, who's the president of SJEE. Keith, I'm going to hand over to you. You're going to either maximize your screen or you're going to share a presentation. I'm not quite sure how you're wanting to present.
All right, thank you, Brandon. I had a full presentation written out in PowerPoint, went through it, and I thought to myself, this is not what I want to do. I want to speak from the heart. I want to speak about where we come from. I want to speak about the people that we have in this wonderful society of ours. And I just want to say that this launch is a very exciting project at a time where the pandemic is wreaking havoc in the world and in South Africa, and also at a time where, you know, there are a lot of challenges in South Africa. And I thought this particular project came, and when I spoke to the team last week or Monday, I said that this is a breath of fresh air. In our troubled society at the moment. I'm very, very, very chuffed. And yes, I'm currently the president, but there have been many, many people. This journal has not just come yesterday or today. It's come from, we mentioned the journal in 2010 and 2011 already. And we just didn't feel it was the right time to start. It was too enormous. We just started the society, and I remember Jenny saying, no, not now. Let us just establish ourselves first. And then it went on for a long time. And as SJEE works, we work with champions, and we work with people with passion who want to get together and make things happen. And this is how this journal came. But I'm jumping the gun in terms of my own notes at the moment, and you can feel that I talk with a lot of pride and a lot of. I'm a very proud president, but we are a very proud society launching this particular journal today. So I'm not going to elaborate on the journal. Bruce and his team will do that, because Bruce and his team, they championed it, and we just stood by and supported it. So it's fantastic. Just a little bit about SASSI. I call it humble beginnings. We had our name wasn't SASSI in the beginning; it was CISA. We then had trademark problems with the words CISA, and then, you know, because we didn't have money to go into the nitty-gritties, we had a volunteer, a legal person, come in and assist us. And I know that the person wouldn't want their name to be mentioned, but that's how we started off with no money, absolutely no money, and we had to find our way around activities. So the inaugural meeting of SASSI was held on the 27th of August 2010 at the EXA offices, and let me just mention EXA. Dr. Oswald Franks was key at EXA, and they wanted to connect with an engineering education society as being the Engineering Council of South Africa. And so our inaugural meeting was at EXA, and they funded quite a bit of it, and they also gave us some donations. And then I cannot sit here and not mention CRE. We didn't only base SASSI then on CRE philosophies only, but there were people, I think Zulfa and a couple of other people, if my memory serves me correctly, that who really assisted us with their finances, with organizing, with logistics. And so that's how we started. I remember funds coming from dean's budgets and research budgets, because we wanted to get this thing off the ground. So I also want to say to you that the founding board was Jenny Case, Theo Andrew, myself, Edward Boyer, Brandon Conley-Reed, Hannes du Toit, Henk de Jager, Debbie Blaine, Oswald Franks, Kim Battle, and Maurice Neje. Now, if you look at the current board, you'll see a lot of those names still there, and they are former presidents that sit on the board currently. All of the former presidents sit on the board, and it's such a fantastic continuation, and I think that's where the stability started and where it came from. So, who does the work in SASSI? We believe in champions. We sit in a board meeting, and somebody comes up with an idea. We like the idea. That person champions it with a couple of people from the board, and we can bring in up. That's how we do our things. And it's amazing how when we every time we get new blood onto the board, we get different sets of skills. We had skill set from board members who were industrialists and had the industry factor. We've got skills that comes with ICT skills and all different type of skills. And I'm not going to mention the names of the people, but I want to say that every time, I mean, right now we've got a skill set in our new board on people interested in Southern African engineering education. And so it expands, and if you find a niche for yourself and you want to go forward, we allow you to do that, and we allow you to explore and discover and do things. And I think that particular philosophy came from, and I don't know if she's listening yet or if she's still awake, from our first president, who was really instrumental and very, very instrumental in terms of the way we're doing things, and we're still doing a lot of the things that you implemented then. And so to Jenny Case, we want to say that your start, your influence right at the start of SJEE is continuing, and I hope that you sit back and feel proud of where we've come to and where we're still going, because this is not the end of the road for us. So who was the founding membership? The founding membership was at our first biennial SJEE conference. Everybody who paid and attended the conference became our founder members. That's how we started. That's where this process started. And then at that same meeting, all of the deans committed to institutional membership. And that's where the initial membership started for us. So people ask now, why the journal? You know, you guys are involved in teaching and learning. But if you look at SJEE objectives, it's to advance engineering education in theory and practice, and to promote research in the field of engineering education. So after 11 years or so, we have now got to the part, our first objective, promote research in the field of engineering education. And on top of it, people ask, now why international? Why not South African? We didn't want to go South Africa. We believe that we can have a footprint internationally. And the second part of that objective is very clear: to encourage local, national, and international collaboration through hosting of forums and in the field of engineering education. So we've not moved away from our objectives. We are now implementing some of the objectives that we had set 11, 12 years ago. So I want to just say, so the origin of this launch, where did the idea of the journal come from? It has been in our heads for a long time. It's been part of our psyche for a long time. And we are, I mean, it's fantastic that we've now come to fruition. And again, the champion got up, he spoke about a journal. Bruce indicated that, you know, but he said, you know, I've spoken to Jenny and it's a lot of work and this, that, and the other. And then some of the other board members said, no, Bruce, you're not going to cop out of this. We are going to do it. And they then rallied around Bruce, and he will talk about that a little later. So I've already explained why it is an international journal. And I also told you, you'll hear from Bruce and his how this thing originated and how it grew to the point that we are launching it today. So the one thing I want to conclude with, that one of the other objectives that we have as SJEE, that we bring people together. I'm a little concerned that we offer very, very good conferences. We don't pat ourselves on the show back. We hear this from other people throughout the country and internationally. We have excellent workshops that we offer. The last one was attended by many, and it was also people really enjoyed it. It was about best practices and practices within the current domain with digital online learning and assessment. But I must say that our attendance could be so much better and higher. And we cannot do it alone as SJEE. The board cannot do it alone. We need you to join us in encouraging your fellow colleagues, encouraging your fellow team members to attend these conferences, which will only add value to themselves. They also add the extra points. You gain those points for your registration, for the registration of as a professional, your CPD points. So please, I'm urging you to encourage your fellow colleagues to join in with the activities that we put together. And then last but not least, I will also like you to then further encourage your colleagues to write articles in this journal, support our journal. It is your journal, it is our journal. We want to make this journal SJEE and South Africa proud in terms of this journal. So what makes us successful? And I've got 2 seconds left, right, Brandon? 2 seconds. Thank you very much. So what makes us successful? We adhere to the Che Guevara's principle, where we say that we are realist, impossible. I want to thank you, and I want to welcome all of you to this launch. I believe that we're going to have a fantastic time together. Thank you very, very much, Program Director.
Keith, thanks very much. Now, and unfortunately, in this format, we can't really clap or show our appreciation in the normal way. But if somebody wants to give their reactions, you can give a little clap in there. Bruce has got it, and Debbie's got it going. There we go. So thanks very much, Keith. Right. Without any further ado, just to before I hand over to Bruce, just to remind you, if you are new to Zoom, if you're wanting me to be full screen at the moment, so you can actually read what's on the slide, and rather than gallery view, just double click on me. But remember, when the next person talks, you'll need to unpin that so that the person who's talking, their slide or their screen can replace the one that you then pin to the wall if you're wanting to see me. Okay, the next on the agenda is Bruce, Dr. Bruce Clute, who's the editor of SJEE. And without any further ado, Bruce, over to you to give us a little bit of background to the journal itself.
Thank you so much, Brandon, and hello everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to talk to you today as the editor-in-chief of the Southern Journal of Engineering Education. It looks like we're running a bit over time, but I think it's okay. I'll speak just 15 minutes and talk a bit about the journal, how we got to this point. You have heard something from Keith already, and a bit about the journal itself and also where we're going in the future. It's quite funny to hear Keith saying that this idea was was kind of in the psyche from 2010 already. I thought I was the one coming up with this great idea, but anyway, it was in 2019. I became part of the board of SJEE, and I raised this idea of a journal, and there was in support of it. And I think someone mentioned I should speak to Jenny Case, and I do understand now why someone told me I should do that. Anyway, I emailed her. I'm actually understanding also her response, listening to what Keith had to say. And I explained what happened. I said, I'm sure it's going to be a huge amount of work, and I don't know if I can afford it right now, but I think it's going to be good for engineering education in South Africa, and also for, I think the time is right. Does she have any thoughts on the matter? Quite funny hearing Keith now. And Jenny replied, she didn't say dear Bruce or hi Bruce, she just said, Bruce, this is a huge, huge conversation. I think one needs to think long and hard about how it will or will not benefit the community to have a local journal. Said a few other things, and then said we should probably not carry on an email, but we're gonna let's have a meeting about it. So we had a meeting, and I left the meeting with sort of 3 pages of notes and a list of people that I had to speak to. And I knew it would be hard work, but it looked like it would be a lot harder work than I thought it would be. A couple of points from the notes that I got was she really a warning about limiting the journal to South Africa. Although she said there's of course a community in South Africa to support a journal like that. Her worry was that, and I do understand it now, and as you can see, it's now the Southern Journal, it's an international journal, and the worry was that we don't want it to be too parochial with a small pool and everyone patting everyone else on the back. And she suggested that the motivation for something like this should be that it fills a gap or meets some sort of need and is in touch with where engineering education is going. Anyway, after the meeting, I sort of hoped it would die a quiet death, and hoped to sort of drop off the agenda of SJEE over the months. And I think in December 2020, I read in the minutes there that the Journal of Engineering Education is currently on ice. and I hoped it would remain on ice until it dropped off the bottom of the agenda. No one mentioned it again. But then in August 2020, Maggie Chetty, one of the board members, said, what happened to that idea of a journal of engineering education? And I tried to explain how it's going to be difficult, etc. But and it's funny how Keith said that other members, sort of encouraged me, but it was actually Keith that was adamant that said, no, you must take this forward. Who's going to volunteer to help Bruce? So people volunteered, and we ended up with our editorial team. So that was August 2020, so 11 months ago, and it's been 11 months of meeting. It has been hard work, but I must admit it's been actually a pleasure working with such a dynamic team. It's really been great. At our last meeting a week ago, Karen said she's gonna miss these meetings. It was Friday morning meetings, but as Karen said, it sort of put you on an up for the day, and it was really just a nice space. We always had welcome and banter was our first item of the agenda. We would just connect as educators and people before getting onto business. I was joking with another colleague that this is a bit like a wedding. It's all the kind of excitement building up to it, and you invite all your friends and their speeches, but after that you're left with the hard work of getting on with being married. I must say there's going to be a honeymoon. I'm hoping for a honeymoon, and most of the speakers today, if they haven't agreed, I hope they will swiftly agree that their talk is going to be turned into a paper. So we are going to have a launch issue, and so that's going to be our little honeymoon. And Keith also mentioned that we do need people to publish in this journal, and any marriage needs to be registered. And so for us, our registration is that we need to be indexed by Scopus and the Directory of Online Journals as well. And for us to be indexed, we need 2 years worth of publications. So all of you need to do your community service and decide that you're going to submit a journal, submit a paper to the Southern Journal so that we can get indexed and we can go forward and grow. So thank you for that. So let me just quickly introduce the editorial team. So I've mentioned Maggie Chetty, I've mentioned Corin Wolf. They want to turn their camera on and wave, they can. The other member is Brandon, who's of course our host today. Thank you, Brandon. And he's the wizard behind the website, which you're going to see shortly. And then Johnson Carroll is our fourth member. Johnson was at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, but he's since moved to Washington, DC. And we have given him special permission to remain part of the editorial team because he's now in the global north. No, that is a joke. We are very clear that everyone who wants to participate, who wants to submit to this journal, who's interested in Global South or collaboration with the Global South is most welcome to be part of this community. I think I must also mention Debbie Blaine, who's part of SJEE. Thanks so much, Debbie, for all your organization about today's symposium. We're really happy for that, and thanks for the contribution. So what kind of journal is this? So let me just share my screen and talk to the aims and scope. So one of the things that first thing that we did was actually think of a name. So thanks to Corin for that name, and you can see the influence of Jenny there, the Southern Journal of Engineering Education. And you can read the aims and scope. There's a scholarly forum for the publication of original research that is relevant to the international engineering education community. The journal is Southern in that it values critical perspectives on the unique challenges facing engineering education in South Africa and the Global South. It is an open access publication that promotes the development of high quality scholarship through a supportive peer review process. We've mentioned, sort of mentioned already, one of the tensions that we have to negotiate, and you can see it in the aims and the scope there. And that is being the official journal of SJEE, but we don't want to remain South African. So South Africa is our base, and I think it's important to have some sort of base, but we are very clear that it is an international journal, and we firmly want to have that international focus. The editorial board at the moment is from SJEE, but it isn't going to stay that way. We want others to join us. We want people from other countries to join us, to become part of the SJEE, sorry, not part of the SJEE, to become part of the editorial team, to become the editor-in-chief, etc. So it's firmly an international journal, and we want to make that very clear. One of the other tensions as well, and you can see it through the aims and the scope, is we want to be a journal that publishes high quality journal articles, high quality scholarship, critical perspectives, original research, and in a kind of emerging and growing community as we are in South Africa and elsewhere in the global South. We understand that we need to support the development of that sort of scholarship. We need to support people through our peer review as well. We want to have training workshops for reviewers as well to grow our pool of reviewers. And so that's another tension that we have to keep in mind as well, having the high quality scholarship, but also being developmental as well. Something else which I want to mention that's not in the aims and scope, but it is mentioned in the sort of extended aims and scope on the website, is that we want to publish a range of research work. So we do particularly value empirical work, but also research reviews, so review papers, conceptual or theoretical pieces, methodological work as well. And we're happy to publish some high quality practice-oriented research. The idea of today, actually, and the speakers today, is to provide a kind of a showcase of a range of work that we're looking forward to publishing. So you'll see in the titles, and you'll hear from the talks today, that there is stuff on methodology, there's papers on theoretical pieces and sort of high-level pieces about research, there's practice-oriented stuff, research reviews and things like that. And this is really exciting. This is what's already going on in the Global South and in collaboration with the Global South. So we're happy to be a journal to record the progress and record the growth that's happening already. It's really exciting. At UCT, we launched a PhD program in engineering education. They started Esther Matemba from Curtin University in Australia, originally from Tanzania, with Lolani Smith from University of Pretoria, have launched the African Engineering Education Network, which is a WhatsApp group and a Zoom, has regular Zoom meetings. So that's really exciting. Engineering education is growing in South America. There was a REES conference in Colombia. Very happy to have Ellen Barbosa from Brazil on board here. Great things happening in Southeast Asia. Korea, Maud Yusuf is with us today as well. REES is happening in Australia this year. Sally Mayo is with us today. And it's going to hopefully be in India in a couple of years as well. So also in the Middle East, in China, things are growing, and happy to have Shungyun with us today, and who's talking today as well. So it's very exciting to be part of this community. I want to also just talk quickly about the notion of this journal being Southern and serving the community in the Global South. So jump to the last slide. So what is the Global South? So there in red is the Global South. You look on Wikipedia and you can find the Global South. And it's quite interesting that actually there are more countries north of the equator that are in the Global South than countries south of the equator. And you'll see up in the north, there's actually the furthest north is Belarus and Ukraine are still part of the Global South, considered part of the Global South. And you can see down at the bottom, Australia and New Zealand are considered part of the Global North. But that gives you an idea. What this misses, though, is that the whole idea of the Global South is a kind of a challenge to the ordering of the world by the first world calling the third world the third world, the developed world calling the third world the developing world, those sorts of terms. And so the idea of the Global South is a challenging of that ordering and saying that there's a South and there's a North. And one of the ways we can illustrate that is there's no reason why North has to be upwards. You can have a different map projection and you can have South upwards, and that's what that sort of static representation of the Global South misses, is that it is about a contestation. And this journal is about critical perspectives. So, critical perspectives on the challenges facing the Global South. And we can, you can think of a number of challenges. Keith has mentioned already that how, especially the Global South has been impacted by the pandemic, and universities in particular have felt the brunt of this pandemic. Those are the sorts of perspectives that we're interested in this journal. And I'd like to mention this quote from Caroline Lavanda and Walter Mignolo, who's a decolonial scholar. And he says, "We aren't interested in issuing intellectual trade restrictions on how individuals exchange and build new intellectual infrastructure. And that's kind of echoes what I was saying earlier. There are no restrictions on this journal in terms of who can participate and who can submit. It's an international journal, and we're interested in critical perspectives and things to do with the global South, but issues, you know, generally in that sort of area. And those last couple of sentences, he says, we are more interested in the knowing subject than in the known object. We are therefore not asking what the global South is, but rather for whom and under what conditions the global South becomes relevant. And I was talking about people, the fantastic people on the editorial team, but we really are in a really wonderful community, a wonderful supportive community. And I think this is very important for us, that if you are here, it's because the global South is relevant for you. And I like the way it turns it around. It's not about the object. You know, there's criticism of the term of the global South and why it shouldn't be used. But I think it's important for those that see themselves as part of the global South. You know, it's important to realize it's about the knowing subject rather than the known object. So finally, as a way forward, let me introduce the advisory board. So it's on our website as well, but you can see the representation, and we just, it's so great that these scholars would be happy to be part of this advisory board. And you can see from all over the world, and many of them are talking to us today. So the idea of the advisory board, as in those notes I got from my early meeting with Jenny, is that this journal wants to be in touch with where engineering education is going. And so the advisory board is there to provide strategic guidance in terms of direction of the journal, and for members to draw on their contextual knowledge to ensure that the journal engages with a broad audience. So we don't want to be parochial, focused on South Africa only, but we want it to be an international journal in touch with where engineering education is going. So we have our first meeting early August. There's also a workshop for the editorial team with Jenny in December, so we're looking forward to that as well. And as I mentioned, we're pushing forward to indexing with Scopus and other bodies as well. And I'm totally confident that this journal is just going to go from strength to strength. So thank you very much for joining us today and being with us. We're looking forward to hearing these talks. It's going to be really interesting, and also the discussion that's going to follow. So thank you so much, and happy honeymoon. Back to you, Brandon. Thank you.
Bruce, thanks so very much. Thanks very much for introducing the journal to us. Just a reminder to those of you who want to make my picture full screen, you just double click on it and then unpin at the end if you need to. So in the interest of time, my job now is to introduce you to the website, but a journal website is a journal website, and we've put together, using open journal systems, an opportunity or a front end that will allow us to be able to advertise the journal's aims and scope, introduce it to the editorial board, but also importantly, be able to make submissions to the journal. So if you go to sjee.org.za, you'll be able to, if you go there now, if you want to, you can see the front page of the journal. You've got the opportunity there to be able to log in if you wish, but you can also then, we hope, submit a journal article, and there's a fairly straightforward front end for you to be able to do that. It mirrors many other journal submission systems across the world. Of course, with any system like this, there are always going to be one or two little teething problems. We have done some dummy runs, and we hope, in fact, that you don't encounter any issues. But if you do, please just drop us a note, and we'll be able to find out what's happened, and then be able to get everything back on track again. But we're all ready for your submissions, and we're looking forward to be able to go through the full review process and be able to give you critical feedback in due course, and hopefully be able to publish your article in our upcoming issues. All right, with that, now we have the opportunity to hear from our plenary speakers. What I have there is a map projection of the world similar to what Bruce had introduced. And I've got the blue dots on there to indicate where our plenary speakers are coming from. First up on the agenda, we have Prof. Chris Winberg from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. She is a professor of higher education studies at CPUT, And her paper today is entitled Engineering Educators' Teaching Portfolios, Reflections on a High-Stakes Practice in a Professional Learning System. So Chris, without any further ado, I hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Brandon, for the introduction. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I hope you can all see it. I'll put it on view mode. Okay, is that working? Everybody can see it?
Yes, we can see it clearly. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm feeling very honored to be able to share my practitioner research with you all. And the presentation is on teaching portfolios. And for those of you who are not sure what they are, I'm going to explain that shortly. Just overview of the presentation, some background and context to how I got involved in this piece of research, and to tell you something about teaching portfolios, and to explain the theoretical framework. There are actually two theoretical frameworks that I'm using, and I'll explain why I felt the need to use two rather than one framework when I get there. A very brief research design, and then findings, and drawing some conclusions. And I hope I'll keep a beady eye on the clock and try and make up some of the time. Okay, so why portfolios? I think the first thing I want to say is that there is, in a lot of educational research, there's a kind of an intersection between practice and research, and between who you are as a practitioner and who you are as a researcher. So you have in your research these strands of practice, and hopefully your practice is also based on some of the research that you've done. And the important thing, I think, for presenting and writing up the research part of your practice is to try and kind of wear these two different hats. You become a bit of a split personality. So all of this started off, as much practitioner research does, it starts off in practice. And the practice involves academic developers in the Western Cape region, under the umbrella of CHEC, the Cape Higher Education Consortium, which is a body that kind of tries to coordinate the work of the 4 universities in the Western Cape. And under this umbrella, we've been offering short courses for years and years, including a short course on developing a teaching portfolio for academics at the 4 institutions. And in particular, my colleague who used to be at UCT, who's now at Rhodes University, Nicola Pallet, and I have kind of spearheaded this. And we kind of got interested in the portfolios, and particular in the differences between portfolios that were being presented by people from STEM disciplines, that's science, technology, engineering, maths disciplines, and those coming from the more social sciences, humanities type disciplines. So we put together a research proposal to the South African National Research Foundation on STEM pedagogy, which had as its focus a kind of an in-depth look at the teaching portfolios that were produced by people in the STEM disciplines. And so that was the kind of shift from practice to kind of researching our own practice, which is quite difficult. You've got to try and get that distance from your own practice, and to look at it in different ways. And that's where theoretical lenses are really important in practitioner research. You might think that because the research is based on practice, the theory is secondary, but it's not. It becomes the really the important way in which you understand practice. From the STEM pedagogy project, we decided to do an even deeper focus into engineering educators' portfolios, and we had a collaboration with Sheffield Hallam University around that, and with ourselves, Cape Peninsula University of Technology, with Stellenbosch University and Mangosuthu University of Technology. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, this is the data. It comes from 24 engineering educators' portfolios across a variety of universities. And those portfolios were for different purposes. Some of them were preparing their portfolios for tenure or for promotion, or for research awards. And this is, as I've tried to explain, part of this presentation is part of a bigger series of research projects, which involved interviews. We interviewed the academics developing their portfolios at various stages of their portfolio development. But what I'm doing today is just taking an in-depth look at the actual portfolios themselves. And so I've selected, we've got a lot more than 24 portfolios in the collection, but I've selected these because these were completed and assessed. Right, so in case there's anyone here who doesn't know what a teaching portfolio is, Selden et al. Are the sort of gurus on the textbook on teaching portfolios, and they've updated it over the years, now more focused on e-portfolios. But basically the genre of a teaching portfolio has these sort of 5 elements to it. There's always, it's traditional at any rate, to start with a teaching philosophy, which is your position as a teacher, what you kind of believe in about teaching, what you think is valuable as an educator and in teaching in general. There's then usually a in-depth description of the context in which you teach in, because the context is kind of important for why you might choose to do certain things above others. There's a description and a rationale for your practice, and a reflection, usually a critical reflection on your practice. And then there's evidence, which could be a series of appendices, or with e-portfolios, links to various forms of evidence. And there's often a bit of a contradiction, a tension in the teaching portfolio between the critical reflection part of it, where you might want to be quite critical of your practice, but then there's another pull about selling yourself and showing your best practice, not sort of, burying the mistakes rather than revealing too much of them. So there's this inherent tension in a portfolio, and we're going to see how that inherent tension plays itself out. So the first theoretical lens that I used was activity theory. Activity theory is a theory that works at a kind of macro scale, where you see things as part of a system. So the activity system of a teaching portfolio would always have a subject, and in this case it would be the engineering educator who's developing the portfolio, and will always have an object, which is which is the focus of your activity, and it's usually about trying to demonstrate your teaching practice, and the tool or the mediating artifact that you use to do that is the portfolio, and the portfolio becomes a proxy for your practice, because practice exists in that fuzzy cloud. You can't access it very easily unless you pile tons of videos of yourself into your portfolio, which nobody really wants to do. So the portfolio becomes this kind of proxy. It's a tool that you use in order to demonstrate your teaching practice. And it's situated in this larger community their rules, expectations, both of the portfolio and of different expectations for tenure, promotion, awards, etc., and different ways in which the teaching portfolio is produced. So that's the one set of lenses. And then because I wanted to kind of hone in onto that teaching portfolio, I felt I needed activity theory lets you kind of understand the portfolio within a larger system, say, of ad hominem promotion. It highlights the system. But if you're wanting to zoom in and look at the portfolios that have been produced, you need another kind of theory to help you. And in this case, I drew on a genre ecology, which really shows, as that little quotation on the side says, it kind of shows the how texts are used in conjunction with each other, and also in particular shows the relationship amongst texts. So you expect to find in a portfolio which is very formal that there would be a lot of official texts, and that would kind of give it a particular style or feel. As a portfolio, there might be images that are quite that are anonymized or sort of official, and you get a kind of a feel for the by mapping the genre ecology of the portfolio, gives you some kind of insight, gives you an insight into what the stance, what the position, what the person is who might be saying one thing but is using a particular mode for saying it, what that might say about conflicts or etc. Okay, so just the research I told you about the participants and the portfolios and different stages of development. So I'm not going to go into that. I've just included some pictures of our teams. The top one is the STEM pedagogy team with our Swedish partner Thomas Olsen, who's kind of really knows a lot about teaching portfolios, and the bottom team is me with Sheffield Hallam group. Okay, so going on to the findings. Oh, so what I'll kind of summarize the findings. So what I did with each portfolio was to map out the genre ecology of them in terms of those 5 elements of the genre: the philosophy statement, the description of context, etc. And what I've got up here on this slide is a generic mapping of the genre ecology of a portfolio which is presented for tenure or for promotion. Now, one of the differences that we expected to find across the portfolios was that portfolios that were presented for tenure would be very different for ones that were for promotion. But in fact, they were very, very similar. There was virtually no difference between a tenure and a promotion, and they had this kind of shape. So in terms of the statement of philosophy, it was very institutionally aligned, no criticism of the institution at all. It was very formally presented, using documents like the prospectus to explain what the person taught, the context. It was very officially described, using descriptions taken off from the departmental website or the institution's website documents. The description of the practice is often quoted from the actual curriculum or syllabus documents, formal sharing of some teaching materials, a link to the formal LMS site. In terms of reflection, it was pretty superficial, very checklist, using sometimes official evaluation forms, etc. So it was pretty much an official version of what seemed to be expected for practice in terms of achieving promotion. There were often massive appendices, lots and lots of documents and evidence, fairly undiscriminatingly put together. And of course, as I mentioned, they were very, very careful not to criticize the institution, and a lot of official documents and very little references, maybe one or two kind of often quite out of date references on engineering education. Here's an example of what someone wrote in this kind of a portfolio. This is not an exaggeration. This is typical. So here, I'll read it quickly. The candidate received a Master's of Statistical Science in 2014. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. A Master's in Engineering in 2014 from a particular university, and after 15 years in the corporate sector, entered academia in June. Being relatively new hybrid academic, the candidate allowed herself 1 year to focus on teaching. Notice, only 1 year to focus on teaching, after which she will commence the PhD in engineering in July 2016. Her research interest incorporates statistics, finance, engineering in the context of South Africa. It's important to maintain a balance between teaching and research, as this approach will positively benefit my students and the discipline at large. So you can see only 1 year is given to teaching, and the candidate has kind of read the department, that the department is interested in research and not interested in teaching. So this is very obviously a kind of a manipulation for promotion. And she kind of like is almost trying to shift the attention from teaching to research. Okay. In contrast, this is a portfolio for an award. Now, what we didn't expect to find was such a difference in the portfolios that were presented for promotion and the portfolios that were presented for teaching awards. But there were huge differences, as you can see, I hope, from this map of the genre ecology. So the award portfolios manifested much more of a teaching identity than an engineering identity. There were the texts, the teaching statement was very personal. It was quite emotive in many cases. Often they weren't, the candidate didn't refer to official websites, but their own website in which they had their portfolio up. Very rich descriptions of contexts with often images of their own students, links to their own sites, and the description was much more narrative, not so formal. A lot of some people used a more passive tense, which was sort of perhaps more comfortable for engineers, but a lot of them used the first person. And there was a lot more evidence of students' work, very proud displays of students' work, and quite a lot of references, quite critical reflections on their own practice and stories of a journey, sometimes a blog in which there was unsolicited comments from students or that kind of thing. And the evidence is often much more selective, perhaps because awards often specify more clearly limitations on what you can put into the appendices, etc. And so this was a whole different, you immediately felt that you're in a different space, that the whole ecology is different. And this is an example of again, a fairly sort of typical example of an award portfolio, and it's, I think, highlights many of these differences. Our campus is one of the most culturally diversified in South Africa. Many of the students we receive are from the surrounding areas. They are disciplined and hardworking, though they tend to undermine their capabilities. They've great potential when you provide them with proper guidance. They're very competitive as well because they do not want to be left behind by others. What drives me in teaching is the value that I add to making young people's lives better. I believe that I'm responsible for making our country a better place through a most powerful tool called education. I started teaching when I was in high school by helping my classmates when they didn't understand something, and took over lessons when our teachers were late or absent. And that was not only limited at school, in sport and at church. It was and is the same. I believe that teaching is in me. I see myself as a coach of a team who appreciates credit for the achievement of my students and take the blame for those who become unsuccessful and try to find remedies for their next attempts. So, I mean, this is quite sort of mind-blowingly different from the ones for promotion. So here you have an academics, totally an engineering educator, totally identifying as a teacher, you know, right, going back to their school days and saying teaching is in me, and also saying, and also kind of taking the blame for students' failures and saying, I'll try and do better next time. It's quite a sort of, you know, mind-boggling difference. And this was, I haven't chosen a particularly exceptional one. This is this was an occurrence very common across them. So to kind of wind things up, we were not expecting this big difference between the award and the promotion or tenure or promotion portfolios. And you can see how very different they were. And I think that the sort of thing that might be driving them is perhaps the reward. You know, I mean, the tenure is a truly high stakes portfolio, as is the promotion one. Salary increases, job status, etc. Whereas with the award, all you get is a certificate and a bit of prize money if you're lucky. So it's really, in theorizing and using activity theory, you can see that, you know, in activity theory, the first rule of activity is the object drives the activity. And you can see that something must have gone on in the object. It's the object of demonstrating your practice. It's not the same in portfolios for promotion and for portfolios for teaching excellence awards. It's very, there's something that's going on there. And I think what might be going on is what one calls in activity theory, you have these conflicts and contradictions, and you also have reversals, the possibility of reversal. So what is common is a tool object reversal, where you get so obsessed, for example, if you're doing an e-portfolio and it's the first time you've used that technology, you get so obsessed with the technology that you have experienced this reversal between the purpose that you're supposed to be using it for and the actually mastering the technology. So that's a very common reversal. What's a less common reversal, and which I think was going on here, was the object outcome reversal. Because in what activity theory says is you have to focus on the object, and the object is demonstrating practice. You can't focus on the outcome. The outcome must flow out of the object. But when you have if you have an object outcome reversal, as I think happened with the promotion portfolios, it just messes up the entire system. The whole system goes out of whack, which happened here. And I think where my little lightning flash is trying to show is that I think there was a problem with the rules, that the two sets of rules, the rules which are the genre rules for the portfolio, and there's rules for promotion, and those rules were not in alignment. And it made me reflect on that probably a teaching portfolio is not a good tool for promotion. It just doesn't, it gets too distorted, and it doesn't, you need some other kind of genre when you're wanting to show your teaching for purposes of promotion. And yeah, so that's it. That was the Sheffield Hallam team at one of the SJEE workshops a couple of years ago. Oh, 2018 already. Gosh, time flies. And just a brief acknowledgement of everyone who was part of this. Thank you. Any questions? And
Chris, thank you so very much.
Yeah.
So the way we can do this, I'm going to read out a question or two from the chat, which has been added to the chat. But there are also, if you're wanting to raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you, and then you feel free to ask Chris any questions that you might have. So Chris, there's two questions that I've got here. One is, this is from Johanna. I get the impression that activity theory is used more widely in South Africa than other parts of the world. I'd be interested in hearing some thoughts about why this could be the reason, what could be the reasons for that. Is there something about activity theory that makes it particularly useful for the South African context?
Okay, well, I mean, first of all, I don't think that's correct. I think, activity theory is a very, very long and established theory, starting with the early Russian psychologists who apparently, according to Engerstrom, were too subversive for anything else. So they shoved them into education, thinking they couldn't do any harm there. So people like Davidov and some of these, the big names, Vygotsky. So it's very much centered in a kind of East Europe, and Finland at the moment is the heart of activity theory. And many, many, many more studies in activity theory than South Africa. But I think it appeals to us in South Africa, appeals to me at any rate, because it helps to reveal some of the complexities. So when you're looking at a portfolio, as I was, you've got to understand it as part of a bigger system. If you can't zoom out, and see the system that it's a part of, your understanding is very, your understanding is always partial, but it's very fragmented if you don't understand it in the system. And because context is so important in South Africa, and I think activity theory is really, really good at revealing context. So that's why I think it's quite popular here. But by no means do we use it more than anyone else. No, it has a very, very long route.
Thanks. And then Nicholas says, could lend itself nicely to a LCT study. I know you've done numerous LCT studies in the past, but LCT studies. So your thoughts on that?
Okay, I'm afraid I didn't. My speaker distorts somewhat. I didn't hear that. You'll have to ask again, Bruce. Brandon, sorry.
Nicholas says this could lend itself to a nice LCT study.
Oh yes. So I could have used LCT, to look at the I've always been wanting to use both LCT and activity theories, using the LCT to hone in on those portfolios to see, I think you could have used specialization, to look at epistemic relations and social relations, and you'd come up with something similar to the genre ecology. So I could have done that. Yeah.
No, it's interesting, Chris, because I mean, as I said, I'm looking at it, and it's almost as if there's depending on what is required, there's a certain awareness that that comes through. So one can almost start thinking about the idea of gazes, or for that matter, insights, and to actually start seeing which of the two gets foregrounded in a way by the students. You know, it's quite an interesting one. But yes, anyway.
Yes, yeah, no, that's a good point, Nicholas. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for that question. I don't see any other hands up in the chat. Sorry, I don't see any questions in the chat. That have, oh, I see, yes, there's some, oh, now there's a lot more that's come through.
Yeah, the one about the electronic portfolios is very interesting, and that is Nicola Pallett's real kind of research interest. And there's a lot of things that happen that when you go online, as we all know, as we all have had experience in the past year and a half from putting our lives online. And I think they're positives and negatives, as with everything. And I think a strong positive for the e-portfolio is that it's easy to update. You know, if you've got a paper-based one and you've got files and things, it's really hard, and people tend not to update them, whereas the e-portfolios are much more updatable, and can include things like these blogs which students can comment on, etc. Much easier to put links and to refresh the links, put new links, and so I think the e-portfolio is a good way to go. But what Nicola and I found in some of our research was that a lot of the existing platforms, I think Mahara might be out of date by now, but like Mahara, it's a portfolio for, you know, it's a bit Instagram-ish, and it's for people who want to show off their beautiful needlework or something. It doesn't work for an academic portfolio. So most people use their website. An e-portfolio becomes a website which they tailor make for their own discipline and their own sort of interests. Because if anybody knows of a sort of platform which works, let me know, because most of them are not good for academic teaching portfolios.
Thanks, Chris. There are some other questions and comments that have been made in the chat. I think what we're going to do is you're going to save these comments, and we'll put together a sort of an FAQ response to the questions that have been raised, so that we can publicize those to the delegates that are here today as in answer, because we won't be able to get through all of them in the time, unfortunately. Chris, I know you've been scrolling through the comments there in the chat. Is there anything else there which you would like to answer straight away before we move on? There is still some time to do so.
Just to say, I hope that, you know, I know in the new journal, there is going to be a role for practitioner research. And I think practitioner research is really, really important. And I would hope that maybe in some small way I've contributed to that. And I know that there are lots of folks here doing further studies in engineering education. And I'd just like to encourage practitioners to think about writing up their practice in theorizing it and sending it to the new journal.
Chris, thanks so much for that plug, and that is exactly the reason why we have you talking today, particularly to give the insight into how you can take practice-based research and make it accessible and available to a journal like ours to be able to, you know, sort of showcase it to the world. So once again, thank you very much for your presentation today. Again, we're only able to give you claps like that, I'm afraid. We can't all spontaneously clap, but we really appreciate your time. Thank you. Right, so we're going to move on now to the second of our plenary presentations, And we've got Changwon Du from the University of Qatar. And so Professor of Problem and Project-Based Learning at the Qatar University is going to be talking to us today about pedagogical development for professional learning in engineering education, state of the arts and methodology. So without any further ado, Changwon, I hand over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see it?
Can see it clearly and can hear you clearly as well.
Oh, great, great. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be part of this new journal team and the conference. Well, I have to say, you can see I have a Chinese name. I come from very north and I worked in Denmark for 15, 20 years before I moved to Qatar. So I'm thinking about when Bruce talked about the North and South, I would say all of us academics, scholars, we all represent everywhere. I would say none of us may be only representing North or South. So and maybe it is our responsibility to bring the world together and share the values and improve the world through interactions. So I would say this is really an opportunity for us to work together, no matter where we are from. I'd like to share today, some of my experiences in working with the faculty, or we say staff development in engineering education. I've been working in, I was one of the first or earliest generation of receiving a PhD in engineering education. It was early 2000. It was very difficult at that time to explain to people what is a degree of engineering. I may look like Chinese getting that in Denmark. But now the field is getting really expanding and working on, there are many journals and the many teams, centers. So I work in many years in the UNESCO PBL Center. We focus on problem project-based learning in engineering. And when I moved to Qatar University these years, we are also trying to establish some unit synergizing efforts in the Middle East. And I think in many other places in Asia, other continents, there are people are working together in team in engineering education. This is really promising. I myself have worked with student learning for many years before I moved to a more focused area on what we say staff development or faculty development, or whatever English we are using. And so today I'd like to share some of my experiences, why it is so important, what can we learn from the recent activities, and how can we better moving to a better future with my reflection. Well, the field is not new. There are many literature have documenting that in order to support organizational change or a larger scope of change, pedagogically, educationally, in engineering education, we need both bottom-up and top-down approaches to change. Either way or both ways, teachers, engineering educators is the center of the whole change. So the idea is not new. Nevertheless, the practices of implementing change, supporting engineering instructors or educators has been very, I would say, culturally diverse. I've been working globally in different countries, and I've seen many places relying on short-term training or information transmission-based approach to support engineering educators to change their classrooms, which are embedded in their own situated context, but have quite some limitations or issues to be addressed in the future. So the field is demanding new research and new practices. And a short summary of what has been in the field, as I can see, for implementing new pedagogy. From this perspective, my own field is more focused on implementing PBL or problem project-based learning, but the lessons or experiences that have been learned, I believe, can be shared at a larger scope. I mean, any institute want their instructors to implement new pedagogy, no matter what, and they want the students to have new competencies. Nevertheless, it's a rather complex matter. Are the instructors ready? Do they have the beliefs? Do they have the understanding, confidence? Do they believe there are benefits? And do they have the skills to implement? And do they have an environment that they can collaborate with others? Do they have the support? And similar challenges have been observed by students. And in particular, students may not support their teachers to change their classrooms. And do the institutes only have their wish to change, or do they really put into action of policy, curriculum, allowing for assessment, updating, and changing evaluations policy to their educators? So many challenges have been involved, which still put the educator or the instructors into the core. So somehow, very often, they become the middle of the sandwich, being squeezed. They want to change, but can they change? How do they change? So, for example, I'd like to share a few very culturally bonded challenges in, I don't like to use the word the so-called South, but in the countries where they have a long history of teachers playing a role of being the master of main sources of knowledge. When they have to implement change, they are facing dilemmas. Do they, for example, are they allowed to change their assessment when they change their teaching methods? Is it just to change the methods without changing the system? And they want to do, for example, students work together as a group, but how do they handle the standardized tests requested by their own institutes? How do they handle the accreditation procedures? How do they balance enhancing students to learn individually and also collaboratively when the students grow up in a culture where they didn't understand what collaboration means? And also, very importantly, many universities, they might encourage their instructors to change, but they don't change their evaluation policy to assess the instructors. And so they are bounded, or they may be pushed in the corner of change or not to change dilemma. Therefore, how to support the professional learning for the engineering educators, seeing from my research perspective, is still the core and is still very important in the years to come. So, and then what do we learn? What can we learn from what has already happened? Over the past 10 years or even 15 years, many universities in the world start to establish center for teaching learning development or labs or any unit focusing on supporting engineering instructors to get pedagogically trained. I don't like the word trained, but that's the word being used. That's this course being used right now. And the idea is, the practices show that they give more lectures or short-term training to the instructors, and hopefully they can go back to implement in their classrooms. And how does this work? If I summarize what has happened in the past, say a couple of decades, the so-called faculty training or training instructors, first they started with the idea of improving individuals. Engineering instructors had no pedagogical or educational background, so they need to be trained about classroom management strategies. For example, how to raise questions, how to organize group work, provide feedbacks. These techniques may be useful, but because this kind of, I would say, mass-based way of training, mainly using forms of lectures, short time, very context independent, tend to be reproducing, very much embedded in a approach in my seeing from my eyes. I'm paying little attention on the teacher's critical reflection, autonomy, and creativity development, and not to say how do this kind of training lead to the outcome of students' learning. That is very little documented. And recently, more and more universities start to call their center faculty development, focusing on how to improve the classroom, try to embed the activities in the approach of constructivism, focusing on helping engineering instructors to understand what learning mean, what are the learner characteristics, and develop their skills for context-dependent strategies and dealing with complex issues. So the field is certainly moving more in a more learner-centered approach. Nevertheless, in some institutes, when they do it in a big scale, like training workshops with 60, hundreds participants, and then with a short-term goal, it's still very constrained with different subject matters sometimes. So there's still lack of space for participants to develop critical reflection. What is their role? I mean, the teaching portfolio, as Chris shared, it's really a good tool for such activities. And however, if a program has 100 people, do they really take their time to write and deeply and use a rich language to express? So, I mean, I'm just saying these are the challenges I have observed through my own work. And again, how do they follow up the outcome of such activities? How do this learning transfer or can be evidenced through outcome of students' learning? That's still, I mean, in this approach, I've seen many engineering instructors start to reflect, but mainly based on their personal experiences. So therefore, we are trying to call for the more wave of focusing on how the teachers learn professionally, focusing their development of their professional agency and becoming change agents. They look for how the engineering instructors might look for alternative pedagogy in a scientific way. Instead of being told what is the best way, they are encouraged to explore creatively what are the best way for their own students with the autonomy to implement. They should be proactive and change creators for their own, not only the classroom, but also their curriculum. Many instructors tend to think how to improve their course, but we need all of our colleagues to think at the curriculum level and think about the values of the how to produce or graduate good engineers for the society. So in order to be able to reflect deeply on their evidences, we should encourage our colleagues to conduct research-based approach. So they document outcome of their change. They should be able to think scientifically. Any change they do in their classroom, how does it work on student learning, in which way, and in which way it can be further improved. And this is also the way to engage them to the scholarship of teaching, learning, and also educational leadership. I mean, this way is friendly to our colleagues, our engineering colleagues. Nevertheless, it's highly demanding for institutional engagement to support. And what do we know about the outcome of the current ongoing activities? If we use the well-known CAREPAC's 4 level of training, which is limited, but if we look at it through this lens, there has been a lot of research documenting participants' perceptions, satisfactions, which are important. If they go to a training or a development activity, they are satisfied, they change their attitudes, they become more motivated. This kind of reaction is very important. However, how does that lead to the actual change of practice? There is no clear evidence showing happy teacher from a development activity will necessarily change their classroom. The research results are inconclusive in this matter. And again, many research papers have already documented how or what conditions after the development activities, our participants change their beliefs, pedagogical beliefs. And that's also what we say the half story told, because what does it mean by change of beliefs in relation to change of practice? In which way the participants change their actual practices using the pedagogy or teaching methods they have learned, what they're encouraged to do, what are the enablers or constraints for such change to take place. This is still the field that demands more research, and it's a highly context bonded matter, and not to mention in the long-term matter, what are the evidence of what they change, their belief and practice will help their own students to improve. So I would say in these other areas from the teaching perspective can still get a lot of good research in the years to come. And basically the research belief is the teacher's professional learning and change is complex. The change and practice may not happen as wished and following certain order. Very often we see in some institutes, if a change happens top down, teachers may change their practice without necessarily believing it. And that's rather dangerous, because if they do something without believing, we don't know the result. And then they might change their belief in the process, but they are reluctant to change their practice, or they modify in different ways. That's also interesting to see in which ways the adjustments, adaptation may work. So somehow this led to our reflection to the future. How do we better support? A constructivist supported way to organize a practice involving the participants to develop meaningful ways that work in their own context. That's highly important. And also somehow in my own work, I would say similar to what Chris talked about, the activity theories, is to basically believe our field, our life is a complex dynamic system. And engineering education institutes is a highly complex environment where the actors are the teachers, the students, they are also actors with carrying on complexity themselves, and they are dealing with the curricula, their professional learning activities for teachers and just all the activities for students. They're dealing with the conditions in their department, administration, and very importantly, governmental policies, professional communities. So somehow a complexity theory offers a lens to understand how we may support change in a holistic and non-linear way. Each choice made by any engineering educator is influenced by multiple aspects. So it's the interaction between actors and elements that makes sense, makes the research work interesting. And also the change process is unpredictable. That also makes the contextual aspect interesting. And change often emerge from small local interactions, how students provide feedbacks to what we do as a change, or how do we give student feedbacks to encourage, how do we collaborate with our peers, how do we deal with or persuade or being involved with the leadership and helping or working with institutional leaders to change. So how do we self-organize issues? So there are many aspects. If taking a conceptual understanding from this, it offers diverse or multiple themes for working on looking into more different factors or aspects within the complexity system. For example, just seeing from the angle of every engineering educator, every choice or decisions or their agentic actions to change involves their intrapersonal characteristics. Are they motivated? Do they believe? Do they have the efficacy stance? Do they have the knowledge and skills? How do they interact with others, the interpersonal sources, like students, peers? Do they have a mentor they can talk to? How do they handle relations with the leaders? And how the institutional settings, are they able to negotiate with their policies, with their schedules, facilities, and also, rather importantly, in which way they negotiate with the history of education in the society. What does that mean? What is the social ideology of being a teacher? How their teaching university teacher identity balance with their engineering identity and their research identity. So there are lots of things they have to handle before they're able to make choices of change. And well, there are many topics and there are diverse multiple research methodologies. Engineering education research has been dominated by quantitative approach. And recent decades are welcoming qualitative research in many ways. For example, like what Chris shared beautifully, using the portfolio narratives, ethnographic studies are also getting more and more possible to publish, although I would say still more difficult than others. My own experiences show, or I would like to provoke a more mixed method research involving different approaches to be able to address more complex questions. And in particular, we are dealing with culturally sensitive issues. And there are a lot of questions are more embedded in the situative, culturally bounded context. In that way, mixed methods or using different methodology, or even just combining different methods to analyze one source of data will give us different angles to understand the richness of our work. For example, QO methodology is it's a method combining qualitative, it's a qualitative approach to understand subjective feelings, but using quantitative approach to in the data analysis process. It's one of the methods that has been well used, getting more and more used in educational research, but in engineering education journals, it's still quite new. So things like this could be brought in to our new journal to work on, encouraging new minds, new thoughts, and creativity. So at the end, I'd like to share one of the another community work. There's a new conference in some weeks to go. It's focusing on PBL, but it's largely on engineering education. So if you're interested, you're very welcome. And in our website, we have a lot of sources if you are interested, and they're free to share. So thank you so much. And yeah, I will stop it here.
Thank you so very much for your presentation. That was great. Once again, it's challenging to appreciate your without a clap. You can see me on the screen, and you can see the claps coming elsewhere on the pictures in front of you. I'm looking over at the participants, looking for somebody to put up their hand to ask a question if they have any questions, or following what's happening in the chat. I'm not seeing anything at the moment. I'm just looking to see who wants to ask the first question.
Sorry, I'm trying to catch which one is the first to me.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I'm not seeing. So Corin, I see Corin Shaw. I'm not sure whether that's a hand up or whether clapping hands.
Brandon, can you hear me?
I can. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, because I posted a question in the chat and I put my hand up, but maybe that's not coming through.
No, I can see it now. Please go ahead.
Okay. Professor Du, I think you actually did touch on my question at the end, but maybe you can just speak a little bit more. I think following on from Chris's talk and from what was going on in the chat as well. Oh, sorry, I'm Debbie Blaine from Stellenbosch University.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to do with the kind of critical mass of getting people to engage in this, and the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And in my experience from my own context, getting a community of practice together, that enthusiasm is contagious. And, you know, people who are like just seeing this as a box that I've got to tick because I have to do this, they change. There is that transformation into somebody who is like, wow, actually, this is great. And you had the little cartoon there of saying, oh, I'm thinking deeply, like people are listening. So maybe you can just speak a little bit about that, about the role of that kind of effective environment and how much that influences the professional development.
Thank you for addressing this. I can see now also Gabby also raised a question about the practitioner. So if you don't mind, I combine this. It's really interesting. For many decades, engineering education researchers are the group was many people who have no engineering backgrounds. Who are researching on practitioners. After some years, I tend to be critical about this approach. I believe the community practice should be, the team should be a mixed, everyone. So in the past 10, 15 years, I actually personally always work with engineers. I work with engineering professors. I tend to attend their lectures, do observation with them. So I do research with them. All my publications are together with them, not just about them, maybe about their students, but together with them. That's, I believe, the best way. They need to not just understand, they should do, for example, project-based learning, but they should really understand why they do it, how this work, how we design it together, and how to evidence their effect through observing their own students, doing together. I mean, they are not trained to do engineering educational research. The field is to be further established by team combining, collaborating with all parties. That's how we bring all of our values. It's not just the North and South, it's also engineers and educational researcher backgrounds people. So we work together, bring our values. So what I actually do, for example, in the past 5 years, I work in Qatar University with the College of Engineering. I work with the faculty or the instructors who are interested to change their classroom. We make a team together. Now our team are 20 people. At the beginning, there were 2, 3. We grow and we have regular meetings to see how they could possibly change their classroom, but they have to make the final decision, make choices about what is the best, what is the most appropriate. Then we design research when they implement, and then we talk to their students, we discuss the data. I mean, they may not be familiar with the literature, theories, and analysis methods at the beginning, but that's how we learn from each other, and they may participate in interpreting the data. So we discuss. So it is not really about or by, it's really together. Sometimes we also involve their students to discuss with us about the result of how we interpret the student learning. So if possible, we could also involve the students. And that's what I believe a way to enlarge the change effect in the long run. I don't know how that help. The team is growing every year, and with more and more, I would believe that really the change agents in engineering education are those who work in the front line of teaching students every day.
Debbie, thanks for that very good question and really comprehensive answer. We have a question in the chat from Maggie Chetty, and it says, I find the assessment quite challenging for PBL initiatives. We also have large classes to contend with. If you could contribute some elements on assessment methods, please.
Yes, it is a very complicated matter. It should be only complex but not complicated. But in reality, because all of our institute leaders want we change the teaching methods without changing the methods, assessment methods. And because for accreditation level, for university evaluation, the assessment methods has been established. Touching upon it, it may hurt some people's pride, it might hurt, it might demand institutional fights. And sometimes the leaders may not be ready for that fight, and they want our teachers just to change your practice, document, they can still do well in all the assessments. And that's really not the logic to go if we use the basic constructive alignment principle. It's not to judge any assessment, but any assessment and change of teaching practice should follow the goals. What are the objectives we are aiming for? So it's really, I have observed many teachers, they got hurt by changing their classroom without being allowed to change. When they teach the first year basic science courses, they have standardized examination and they are not allowed to touch. At the end, the student may complain if they have to memorize or have to do different approach to pass assessment. Well, the teachers are giving them different teaching methods. It's hurting the teachers' motivation. So that's really what, when we work, in my job, work with their change of curriculum courses, really try to discuss this with the leadership and need institutional involvement. And that should be the condition. Now I'm trying to provoke that when an instructor is asked to change the classroom, they should be allowed to align the assessment as a condition to make it convenient or to make it appropriate. I don't know how I have answered somehow. Otherwise, please do.
Thanks
happy to further elaborate.
No, that's great. So just a reminder to people in the chat to please, in the participants, to please keep your mics muted. That'll help for feedback into the system.
Yes, sure.
No, so that was somebody had just joined and their mic was on. So that was a question particularly from Maggie about talking about assessment, and then Nikki Bolmrand followed up to talk about how do you deal with large classes and the open-ended divergent nature of PBL projects in large classes.
I don't know what you mean by large. Ideally, for the appropriateness, for the first time, if you have 30, 40 students in your classroom, it's rather convenient to start with it within your class. If you have a classroom of 80 or 100, it's possible. I've tried that with many teachers in China. It is possible, but it's nice to have a researchers or teaching assistant, because if you want to divide students to discuss in the classroom, you need someone to help go around to support the discussion, or you could collaborate with another lecturer. So you can, the idea is to be able to support the discussion. And right now in China, we have tried to put this into a policy level, suggesting if they have 100 students in a classroom, they should really put the classroom into 2 sessions. So the teacher can get 2 times merit. So they don't, to ensure the result. 200 is really very difficult. I don't think that's a way to start with. It's ideal you start with 30, 50, or divide your big classrooms.
Thanks. That's a really useful answer. In the chat, so Nikki's talking 100 to 200 students, so that's a sort of a typical class for our engineering classes, and Lilani Smith is talking about 1,700 students, which is a very large.
1,700, I don't think you can do anything interactive, but that's more giving lectures. During COVID, there are many new methodology or new thinking about how teaching should be done. We can still put our lectures online. We give them by video, we do them, so we don't need to see them with the students. But the time we meet our students, we could deal with more like, yeah, flipped way and organized discussion. It's meaningful. That's what I would say. That's a trend to go nowadays.
Great, thank you. Are there any, I'm not seeing any follow-up questions. So Maggie says she's got classes of 80 to 90. Nicholas is dealing with sort of 200 odd. Challenging, very, very challenging. We've got some good insight today from this presentation. Any final questions? I'm looking at the participants. I don't see any hands going up. If you find that you aren't able to raise your hand, now's your opportunity to unmute yourself and raise your question.
Indeed.
In which case, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for your presentation today. It was great, and it really does talk to the aims and scope of.
Thank you. If I may add one thing, one of the biggest thing I'm thinking is through working with different institutes. If we now, maybe that's also what the journal could see as one of the missions to go. If really engineering institutes want to improve, they should educationally, one of the important policy they should make is to encourage practitioners, the engineering professors, to do educational research and recognize their research. I know in some places they only recognize their published paper is if it's only their own field. But if you want to encourage good research, one needs to think to encourage everyone to do research and good research, and that's one to develop good practices in research. That's my opinion.
Thank you for those closing remarks. That's
Thank you so much for everyone.
Wonderful. Great. And now we're going to turn our attention to Professor Jenny Case, who is currently located in the United States, but you would have heard her name a few times in the build-up to this presentation now about the origins of SJEE, the South African Society for Engineering Education, as well as the origins of the journal. Jenny was at the University of Cape Town and is currently the Professor of Engineering Education in the College of Engineering at Virginia Tech. She's also an honorary professor at the University of Cape Town still. She's going to present today on useful provocations, reflections on a program of engineering education research. It is 5:30 in the morning in Virginia, so we're very pleased that Jenny has been able to join us today. I know we're a few Oh, we seem to have some interesting.
It was like 3 years ago.
Yes, I think we've got somebody whose mic is not muted. I can't see them.
This is my name.
That's interesting. Jenny, are you around?
It's mine, that's my product. Okay, so then any other type of details?
Hello, Jenny.
Hey, I'm right here, Brandon.
Oh, we seem to have had some very, very interesting feedback from from someone else, but I couldn't see any mic that was open. So Jenny, a very warm welcome to you. It's wonderful to have you in the room with us. We're looking forward to your presentation. So please, over to you.
Thanks very much, Brandon, for that lovely introduction. And it's incredibly exciting to be here today. It really, really is. And what a wonderful program it has been so far. And I'm really honored to be following on Chris Winberg and Sheng-An Du. So nice to see the things you've been doing in your research. These are two people whose work I've been following for maybe 20 years, and just lovely to see the evolution. And I think the themes that are crystallizing already for me around this journal of some deep interrogations of practice with a strong cultural lens and a lot of theoretical sophistication. So I'm very honored to be following on from that. So I'm going to share my screen, and also just lovely to scroll down the participant lists and see so many people that I recognize. And Bruce, congratulations on launch of this journal. I apologize for any, Bruce always like pulls out emails I wrote 2 years ago in some like outspoken way. I'm so impressed at how this has come together, and the timing feels absolutely perfect. So with no further ado then, let me see if I can get my slides up. Looks like I can, and let's get into slideshow mode. So there we go. I assume someone will ping me if they can't see them or can't hear me or anything. So I've titled this Useful Provocations ? And reflecting on a program of engineering ed research, and I guess it will become pretty clear soon what I'm going to be trying to do. So let me move on with that. This question continues to fascinate me of why do we do engineering ed research? And I've become used to this acronym that the North Americans use, EER. And I know it seems like it seems a question with a very simple answer. And we often have that answer pretty ready to say. I've got that first bullet. Why do we say we do engineering ed research? Why do we really do it? My question is, why did you end up doing that particular project? What spurred you to do it? So there, why do you choose the projects that you do? So that's my question for the day. And I've sort of turned that question in on some of my own work. I'll explain that shortly. So the other prompt here really, which really got me thinking, I did a talk a while back at in my department of Virginia Tech. I was on a panel talking about our research, and a PhD student asked the question, what research would you do if you hadn't had to be chasing the research funding? And I had this extraordinary realization that in my 21 years at UCT, the research I chose to do was never prompted by the funding. So I was very lucky to get some funding over the years from the NRF. But the way funding worked in South Africa was less tied to having to make a very strong case around a particular project. And I had such incredible freedom to follow questions that I thought were important. And I want to, I guess, if you remember anything from this talk, I want to say across the global South, where, well, basically anywhere out of the US doesn't have that kind of funding, and it may make one feel at a disadvantage. I also want to say there's a huge advantage. There's an intellectual freedom that I think we need to take hold of and celebrate. And I think this journal is going to showcase really interesting research. So with that as an introduction, I want to reference a talk I was so very happy to give at REES in 2019 in Cape Town, an in-person gathering of so many of the people in the room today. And Sally Mail, who's here, I'm so sorry that REES this year in person will only be Australians and New Zealanders, but the rest of us are looking forward to connecting virtually. So I guess what I did here was I sort of looked at why do we say what we do? So that question of why do we say what research we're doing? And I looked at published journal articles across two of the key engineering ed journals and saw this argument that we tend to make, and I'm sure I've made and I continue to make in a way, is that we do research in order to know how to improve engineering education. I'm using the word reform there. And then based on reform in engineering education, we will improve the world. We'll improve the practice of engineering, we will improve society and so on. And in that talk, I really interrogated both these causal links. The degree to which education research has ever in itself been the driver for change in education. The evidence there is not quite what you'd expect. And also the degree to which reform of education actually directly links to a change in society. That, again, that is a much more complicated link, and it's certainly not unidirectional. So I guess it was a talk that I have not had the nerve to do anything more than just have on my academia website, because it certainly doesn't necessarily go down well everywhere to ask these questions. But I guess that is really part of my thinking that leads into some of the comments for today. And then another piece of work that's been so exciting to do. I thought I was the only person up at 3:30 this morning with lots of coffee, but actually Mike Claassen from the University of Toronto is in this session today, and a REEN board member was the lead on this article, together with Brent Jessic from Purdue, Lena Zeng, who was also working with us and based at Tsinghua in China. And we did this comparative study looking at the institutionalization of engineering ed research across 3 countries. So looking at really, how does engineering ed research come to happen? How does it come to be institutionalized? And how do groups of people join together and create institutional structures to support what they do? And hopefully that will come out quite soon in a book that I've shown, an edited book there. It was tremendously interesting to compare Australia, China, and the US in this regard. And we use this framework looking at how do institutions sort of form? And by the way, we're not talking about a university there. So the idea of institutions there is more small scale. CREE is an institution. And I'm delighted to say we're following that up with a study that is comparing Australia and New Zealand. And Bruce, thank you. You've already been helping us on that study that some of my PhD students are working on in the US. So I guess this just opened this up again so much furthermore for me. Contexts are very, very different, and engineering ed research comes to take on different forms in different places. And again, I think this journal is going to be uniquely placed to offer spaces for those different voices. So to move then to the sort of substance for the talk today, which feels terribly indulgent. And, I did a first version of this talk a while back and floated this past Bruce, and he thought it was useful, but as I say, it feels terribly indulgent. So I'm going to talk about looking back at research that I was able to do mostly during my time at UCT, and asking for myself the question, why did I do the research I did? And I was kind of surprised and not surprised to find the answer. And absolutely, just to really acknowledge everybody who was part of this journey. It was the most extraordinary place to grow up as an engineering ed researcher in South Africa at UCT, and what a community. And I'm just so excited to see people who are continuing to grow. So what I found when I looked across these, research that I'd done since my very first conference paper ever, I found myself doing the following, which was that there was a statement out there that most people accept, a statement about education, about engineering education, which provokes for me some questions, which usually are really, is that true? I wonder what's really going on the ground. I've been lucky to find opportunities in some ways to research, to collect some data, to analyze it, and then get going. So I've got 6 examples. And as I say, they're certainly not meaning to say, this is how you should do this, or is this in any way particularly brilliant, but just maybe an invitation to be provoked by things and let your provocations lead to research. So this is indeed the first conference paper I ever presented. And it was in 1996, and I have such fond memories. My first time going to a conference at Rhodes University, in a place that was at that point Grahamstown. And it's a fairly corny title, I will acknowledge, when group work isn't working. It is titled. And what lies behind this paper, which mercifully I actually can't even find the actual paper. So it's gone into the ether somewhere, which is great. Yes, I did want to acknowledge Grahamstown is now Makanda. So here was the statement. So the statement that, and I was working with Duncan Fraser and others, had come back from conferences in the US. And the statement was something like, collaborative learning is a great way to structure engineering ed courses. And the opportunity that was there was that Duncan Fraser, whose legend lives on in this community, he had implemented this in his second year chemical engineering class at the University of Cape Town. And I had the opportunity to go and really just interview students about their experiences of this course. And whoops, sorry, I went on a slide. I didn't mean to do that. And I mean, the short version is that certainly there was a lot that was valuable, but students also struggled with the group work environment, what I called group work there. And I guess that has been, you know, something that I'm really interested in. How do students experience education innovations? What is their real experience? What sense do they make of them? So that was the first one. I picked out 6, by the way. There are six such slides, and I'm really trying to be short so we have time for conversation, because I'm hoping somebody might disagree with me on what I'm putting out. So opportunity number 2 was a statement, something like this, that I certainly, in a way, really believed at that time, coming from my own background in science education research especially, was something like conceptually focused teaching will help student learning in complex engineering science courses. And I had the opportunity that my colleague Alison Lewis, now the Dean of Engineering and Built Environment at UCT, was implementing this in her second year chemical engineering class at UCT. You have to feel for those second year chemical engineering students. We were always experimenting on them. It actually was my PhD study, and I fully anticipated proving how fabulous this method was. In actual fact, the failure rates really increased that year. So at first it was rather distressing, because I thought, oh, but it led to, I actually think, a much more interesting PhD, because I then, again, through particularly interviewing, but also looking at students' artifacts of their class assessments, including journal reflections, I found that actually this approach required students to shift their approach to learning. And that's not easy to do, especially in one course where it's high stakes and you're worried about failing in second year chemical engineering. I had another amazing opportunity then to meet someone called Delia Marshall, who'd done a PhD on a very similar topic with engineering students. And we put our 2 PhD sort of side by side and did a version of what I could suppose called meta-analysis, and came up with an identification of a sort of intermediate approach to learning called a procedural approach to learning, which we published in Studies in Higher Ed. So that's opportunity number 2. Number 3 is most probably the biggest provocation ever, and there's some interest that I now find myself living and working in the US, because this was on the Global Congress on Engineering Education in Cape Town 2008. It was an amazing opportunity to connect internationally. I was invited to be on a panel that was going to be responding to Thomas Friedman's book, which claimed then, I suppose the book still claims, that the world is flat. In short, that globalization has obviously evened out all sorts of flows of trade, and thus, you know, it's this wonderful new world for collaboration and so on. I mean, I'm very badly summarizing Friedman's argument, but I was very angry at that time, I will acknowledge. So I also want to talk about where do you put your anger even, because I so disagreed with that thesis, and I found a paper that actually said the world is spiky because of the massive global inequalities. And so I did speak on that panel, and I see that the title is sort of there again. I've never had the nerve to do anything to do further than to park this on my academia site, so it's there. I said some comments from the values of the South, applications for engineering education. But I met someone the other day who remembered that talk. It was quite interesting. So I guess the pattern for me is when I've had moments where I've even actually got quite angry about things I disagree with. I want to acknowledge that. But as a researcher, you have to find something to do with that. And I think it can be productive. The 4th out of 6 papers I want to pull out is another thing that I felt quite provoked by, and those at UCT will certainly remember this debate, and nationally. There was a proposal to increase the degree length of the bachelor's degrees from 3 to 4 years, and with that, the engineering degrees from 4 to 5 years. And there are colleagues here who were very involved in that very detailed proposal that was led by Ian Scott and done on behalf of the SJEE. And I will totally acknowledge I was a bit skeptical on that proposal and its implications. But I end up asking myself the question, why do we do a 4-year engineering degree? Where did this come from? And I guess I found the reading just so interesting. And in short, I wrote a paper which really is honestly drawing on other people's fantastic historical research, tracing how this 4-year undergrad has become in some ways a bit of a norm, although of course the Bologna structure from Europe is very different. And in that paper, I was also fascinated to note the Australian institutions that had followed that model. But I guess in short for myself, it became part of my argument that I felt we should be retaining the 4-year degree. Obviously, in some ways that debate became superseded by other debates in South African higher education. The fifth one pulling out here is a paper that I ended up publishing in the Journal of Education, which is a South African journal that I think is a great journal. And I guess it's this thing that niggled forever, and it really is what I put right in one of those early slides. What's the relationship between education research and educational change? And I guess, you know, it sometimes became quite comfortable to sort of say, I'm an expert and I know about good teaching methods and people should read my research and change their teaching. But I found this amazing opportunity to reflect on that. You know, I mentioned the second-year chemical engineering course where I did my PhD, and exactly 10 years on, I finally got to get my own sweaty paws onto that course, and I became the convener and lectured on that course for a couple of years. I just loved doing that. And I'd finished that when I stopped and I asked myself this question. So I know you could ask how objective is any of this, but did I really apply my research findings was the question I asked myself. And so I looked at what were the research findings from 10 years before, and I looked at the evidence about what I'd actually focused on while I taught that course. And I mean, anyone who knows this would not be surprised that, of course, even, I guess my answer is if you don't even transfer your own knowledge directly into your own teaching, it might point to my deficiencies as a teacher, but to be honest, I think it is that in teaching, you're responding to so many contextual matters that you're not simply applying the science. So that was really the short version of that paper. And then the last one, you'll be pleased I'm here, is something that I'm in process with at the moment. We've actually submitted this article to a journal. And this has been an exciting study to be part of. That involves chemical engineering and chemistry programs across 3 countries, South Africa, UK, and the US. And we've been following students over 4 years of these programs. We have a lot of data. And I guess the thing that's, I've also, again, I've always been a little provoked by some of the arguments coming from the online education space. I totally see the value of online education. But I've never thought that it's going to supersede, even post-COVID, I still don't believe it's going to supersede in-person education. And then it often comes forward with this argument that lectures are outdated and irrelevant for teaching in the present. And I guess this paper is really looking at students. We still do use lectures a lot in engineering programs across the globe. And this looked at what are students' experiences of lectures and how do they find them in general, and in lectures, what do they value? And that has been very exciting work to work with. I mean, the short answer is that there's actually a lot of value that engineering students do derive from lectures. even relatively traditional lectures. So my conclusion is hardly a conclusion, is just to put all of that out as a provocation. I actually have managed to be within the 20 minutes I planned to talk, because I do hope maybe there'll be questions and discussion. Yeah, I just think that a lot of people do research thinking they have to do the same stuff that everybody's always done, and they have to sort of maybe prove, and there is value to take an idea and take it into a different context. But I find there's such a rich territory for digging into education, because it's so complex, and what are seen to be simple solutions are seldom easy solutions to complex problems. So I'm interested in what really happens. I obviously am so attracted by the power of education, the transformative power of teaching and of curriculum, and continue to be fascinated to explore that. And even if it doesn't always involve proving how something works, I hope that one comes forward with insights that are interesting. And I guess in closing, to say that I really hope that the Southern Journal of Engineering Education is going to give us a space for asking new questions and interrogating things, especially in a range of different contexts globally, where I'm convinced that things are much more interesting than just one version. So I will stop sharing and hand back to Brandon to chair us.
Jenny, thank you very much for, once again, a provocative presentation. I remember your presentation that you referred to in Cape Town a couple of years ago, and it is another one of those provocative ones. We have a question from Bruce in the chat, who I'll read out to you. I see he's there smiling, but I'll read it on his behalf then. What advice would you give to colleagues who have graduated with a technical degree in engineering, who might be worried about taking the interesting questions that you've been able to do? Taking on the interesting questions, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bruce. It's a great question. And I think this is also why I fully salute the comments we had earlier about, I mean, education research is, it's an open field that you can join. None of us were trained in education research to start with. I've only supervised PhD students who had science or engineering bachelor's degrees and often master's degrees. So for all of us, it's a journey. And one can just get started. And as I say, maybe it's fortunate that that first conference paper of mine is no longer, but I've got on my bookshelf, you know, things I wrote even before then when I was a master's student. I think one should not be afraid to ask questions. I think collaborations are so important, and I really endorse Jingwan's comments in that regard. And Chris also really exemplified that in her talk. And then, yeah, I think we all have it in us to be intellectually engaged. And so it really is to say, don't feel constrained. You know, in terms of, I know there's a lot of pressure to publish, so yay, it's fabulous, there's a new journal. But also for me, a journal article has to have something new to say. And I think I love that there are more outlets now, because people can get hung up thinking they need to write in a certain way. I'm happy to say, I know this has been recorded, but I will actually say it, that the US context tends to be more constrained in terms of format. That's not only about engineering education, that's the whole of social science in the US. There are reasons for that. So you may feel more that you have to follow a certain format if you want to go for a journal that is located in the US. There are also obviously advantages to doing that. But I just want to say there are lots of different journals out there. So, you know, maybe just I'll say one more thing, then I will stop. But Bruce, what a great question to start me on. I think my invitation is join the conversation. So many people, you know, I am an editor-in-chief for higher education. And a lot of people send an article to us that has no relation to anything that's ever been published in the field of higher education, and you're just not sure why they did it. I know why they did it, because they were under pressure to publish, but go and read what's there. Read. Read things, find things you like, find things you dislike, and join the conversation. And I really acknowledge early on, my PhD advisor, Dick Gunston, I think really encouraged me to find my voice. I read things about approaches to learning. There was stuff I really liked, and there was stuff I really disliked in that field. And I wrote some like fairly, I wrote things on that. I wrote with Delia Marshall a response to a paper that was out there by someone called Tamsin Haggis that critiqued approaches to learning. We wrote a response. No one writes response articles anymore. I don't know why. And then over Delia and I had been at a conference, and we bumped into this person, Tamsin Haggis, and I nearly wanted to die. I was like, hi, I'm Case, and this is Marshall. But it became then a great conversation, and she became a great colleague as well. So join the conversation, join the community, get reading, and never stop asking questions. Honestly, then if you're just churning out the same stuff year after year, and I know that is a way of having an academic life, it would bore me to tears. So yeah, I'll stop on that. Thanks, Bruce.
Jenny, thanks for that response. We've got two hands up in the room at the moment. The first from Dion, and then I'll move to Nicholas. So Dion, over to you for the moment.
Thank you, Prof, for the presentation. I think listening to your presentation, especially the questions, I could see that for the most part you were researching stuff that interested you. So what I wanted to find out for us as young up-and-coming researchers, what would your advice be between striking the balance between what your questions interest you and where the funding may come from? For example, you're speaking about a research now that you've been doing for 4 years. I'm assuming that there has to be substantial funding that goes into there. So how do you strike the balance between the questions that you are personally interested in and the ones where the funding is going to come from, would that also interest them? Thank you.
Dion, lovely to see you in the room. Thanks for that question. And I'm pleased you pulled me back to that as well, because I started out the talk by saying, sometimes if you don't have to chase funding, you have more freedom to do things that interest you. And I acknowledge that all of us increasingly are under some pressure to be able to bring in funding. Again, and I'm wanting to acknowledge the affordances of every place. And I should say right out, I mean, I am in this stage in my career, it's an incredible privilege to be at Virginia Tech, heading up a department, with something like 50 full-time PhD students. And that doesn't come about without a lot of people being very successful bringing in research funding in that context. So I'm not meaning to dismiss that. I'm just meaning to say, as we saw in that case study, in Australia, for example, and Sally, thank you, you helped us a lot on that case study. I saw a context where funding was more coming internally through institutions, and I'm seeing this also in the work we're doing, writing about New Zealand now. And therefore, the thing to be doing there is to be doing what your dean values, which is very different to doing what the NSF wants people to do. So each context does have different pressures and opportunities. And I completely acknowledge that also the period of NSF, NRF public funding that I had access to as a South African has obviously shifted to some degree. I still think there are ways, because as I say, I'm learning, and I don't advise anyone to try and shift to a different research funding context when they're 50, because old dogs and new tricks. I really will acknowledge I'm still in quite a learning curve in the US context. But my colleagues there have also very smartly found ways of writing fundable proposals that also allows them to explore things that they care about. So I think it's because, education is, like, really, let's be honest, the research is cheap to do in terms of equipment costs. So the costs are time and the costs of funding to travel, I guess. You know, obviously there are more costs. I'm being a bit simplistic there, but sometimes a lot of what you have is how much time do you have on hand? Another huge privilege we have in South Africa has been on 12-month contracts. So my academic staff, I'll use that term, at Virginia Tech are all on 9-month contracts and have the opportunity, which everybody does do, to use research funding to fund a 3-month part of their salary. In short, you can earn extra third of your salary, and most people seek to do that. But that does put a lot of pressure on one to get funding in and to spend your 3 months of your year working on those grants. So there is quite something about having 12 months, even when you take some leave, you're not lecturing students 11 months of the year. So yeah, I mean, that's not a great answer, I guess, Dion. I'm just saying, whatever context you're in, there's always more opportunities than people think. And I think the way of crafting something that can attract funding still rests on looking at what's happening in practice, finding the questions that are relevant in practice, and looking at what people are already writing about and bringing the two together. That's a very partial answer. I could give you a more specific one, but I think I'll leave it as just a starting point.
Thanks, Jenny. Nicholas, you're up next with your hand up.
Yes, hello. Thank you for your lovely presentation. Just like to pick up on, I think, the first comment that was made, and also the tail end of the previous speaker as well. The importance of, you talked about provocations for research, and yes, as an engineer, being an electrical engineer and dealing with large classes over the years, I've had many research provocations in terms of education. Yet none of them moved anything further than the element of whinging or asking myself deep searching questions about why my students are failing. And it was only after I completed a PhD dip in higher education that I realized that what I was missing is, in effect, some form of a language of description, some way of a bunch of ordering principles that helped me actually see the problems. Before that, education and being a sort of loosely put in the humanities was always seen as sort of airy, fairy, fluffy, wuffy, and not really worth engaging in, so to speak, which is wrong. So you mentioned about the cost of doing research, and I do think that part of the cost is engaging in theory, which is not always that easy for an engineering academic to do. And it raises an important question, because on the one hand, we're wanting our research, our academic staff to get involved in educational research, but there's also a quite significant, I don't want to say learning curve, so to speak, but a process of engaging, of acquiring a way of seeing things, of seeing education that also needs to be addressed. I mean, I almost want to say a process of getting unplugged from the matrix, so to speak. So yeah, it's important questions, important things to think about. Thank you.
So I just really want to endorse what Nick put out here, and just lovely to engage a little bit in your journey. Thanks for reminding me in the breakout this morning that we had an email interchange over this last year or so on your work. I think what you raised, which I just really, I think is so exciting how it's grown, is the value of formal graduates, postgraduate, we'll say, studies in engineering education or education more broadly. And so I commend you for doing your PG dip and now working on a master's degree. And really there's a lot of, I mean, I don't think one needs to, not everyone needs to do a PhD. On the other hand, if you want to make this really your research area, it's hard to think how, in no technical area would one think you can really make this your research area if you don't have a very deep training in that area. I also think you have made those there is something though, there's lots of different levels. And I mean, I've written and thought a lot about scholarship of teaching and learning. So how different people come to put this together in their own world as being an engineering educator. Clearly not every engineering educator can have a PhD. And so what does it take to get the language of description that you pointed out? And I do think there's a space for the kind of coursework that you spoke of in, say, a PG DIP. And really the value for shifting the way you think about teaching and learning. Because I said earlier on, teaching and learning are not straightforward processes, and how one can build a different way of thinking about students. Because I do think you sort of kindly spoke of your own. I mean, teaching is hard as well. There's a lot of the coalface of big classes and, issues around maybe cheating. I heard my colleagues talking about that just yesterday, online cheating. And, there are things that can put one in quite a negative disposition towards students. And you want to avoid that. You want to be in a more productive way of being a teacher. And I do think there's also space here for building out new frameworks for thinking about one's teaching. So Nick, thanks for those comments. Sorry, I've sort of riffed off them in a couple of different directions. There's so much that we can speak about. We can take another one. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. Yes, there's a lot of questions that are coming in the chat, and I put in the chat a reminder of the rest of the program. We're going to have, so Ellen is due to talk at 12:15, and it's around 10 minutes past or so. We'll have a comfort break for those of you that are wanting to just nip away just for a quick break. So Jenny, I don't see Erd. So I'm going to prioritize the people that put their hands up first. So Erd, I see your hand is up. I'll hand over to you to ask your question for Jenny.
Thanks, Brendan, and thank you very much for your presentation, Jenny. I'm actually very interested by the fact that you have international exposure. You've worked in South Africa and you're working in the US, and actually you have a lot of international collaboration. Taking it from the previous presenters, you can actually feel that this is a very complex field, because complexity is the word that we have been hearing from the beginning. And taking it from Prof. Du, I also note the word change. And by change, I get the fact that somehow change is scary and it can get costly. Now, from the South African experience, I can actually see that one of the measures of performance, because remember, we have masses and they come with all the demands on inclusivity, diversity, but there is need for some outcome. And the measures of outcome is your pass rate, throughput rates, and all this type of measurement where basically you judge by the number of the students that the program can graduate. How do you benchmark or compare this kind of demands from your, do you feel the same kind of sentiment working in the US, for example, where you would like to try new avenues, new approaches, but the cost of that is that you have a set of kind of static expectation your students have to pass. But that is not guaranteed by the fact that the change that you're implementing can actually create a transient that is not very sure. How do you navigate through this? And how did you feel actually these demands as to your maybe international exposure with respect to what is happening in South Africa right now? Because I don't know about the other institution, but I can actually feel this sense of success measured by how many students can you graduate? Because at this point in time, I don't think we really have a real measurement of, let's say, academic. Okay, we don't have a measurement of teaching and learning success. we measured it by the proxy of how much did you graduate, pass rate and throughput. What is your experience, and maybe what can you advise in this field from both experiences? Thank you.
Thanks for a very deep and huge question. I'm going to say the core of it is educational change. And I think, and maybe in some ways I gave a much bigger talk on that in that keynote 2 years ago. So I interrogate some of the arguments around educational change. I do think that education as a phenomenon is dynamic and changing. I don't believe the arguments which say it's never changes. It changes a lot in relation to the society that surrounds it. And sometimes those changes are more profound than even the changes that education reform is aimed for. I do believe that what we in South Africa call throughput rates are important. I think the cost nowadays especially, but always the opportunity cost of young people coming into higher education and the wish to leave as a graduate is something we have to honor. And I really was excited to work in chemical engineering at UCT over a period of time where we actually really shifted graduation patterns. And Hilton Haydenreich is my colleague who really published with me on that, led on that. So it really matters because people's lives. And if I speak to the US context, I entirely endorse the pressure to change who are the students in engineering and who is succeeding. I do want to actually say to South Africans on that context, overall, our throughput rates are actually globally not bad. So I do think a lot of good work has happened. Clearly, obviously, I mean, I understand that it takes a lot to create a graduate and one can't just simply, obviously make it all easy. I could talk for a lot longer on the comments that you sort of opened up here. I maybe just want to say, and maybe if I can pick up, Brandon, do you mind me picking up Mike Clausen's comment in this and actually saying through to another comment I see earlier as well, in a very deft move, because I see your time.
Your time is pretty much up, so please go ahead and use those
1
comments.
minute.
Yeah.
You want me to respond to those comments or not?
No,
we have 1 minute.
Go for it.
Just to say, so internationally comparative work, I think, is so important. I'm so excited that this journal's ambitious international reach. And most definitely we should be engaging more with that. So yeah, Mike, sorry, that's not a big answer. And then iPad gave us a question earlier on. I don't know who iPad is, but I just want to say the role of EE, engineering ed research that looks at the workplace. There's a huge set of important questions there, and people, I'm really fortunate to be at Virginia Tech with some people who've led on that research. My colleague Marie Peretti is a key person there, an amazing study there, and I'm actually in a PhD defense this afternoon. I've been on a committee with one of her students who's researching in that area. Oh man, again, there are a lot of maybe simple things that are said about, for example, the competency gap. And I'm so excited that this PhD I'm watching defend this afternoon has it done exactly what I've done through my studies and asked questions about, well, what is that actually? So Brandon, I'll stop, but I wanted to just respond to those two. And thank you, iPad, Milani.
Jenny, thank you once again for a nice thought-provoking presentation. You can see that the questions that have come up definitely means that you've pushed all the right buttons. Hopefully you'll be able to stick around for some of the rest of the presentations before you have to head off to your work day. That will be a long day for you. So as I indicated a few moments ago, what we're going to do now is we're going to just have a few moments break, a 5-minute break, just to stretch your legs, make some coffee, or go to the bathroom if you need to, and then we'll be back in time at 12:15 for the start of the next presentation. So I'll leave you now and see you in a few moments. Right, everyone, it's 12:15, and just wait for a moment or so for the last people who are going to be joining us still. We certainly have had a series of really good presentations so far, and we're going to follow that up now with another presentation Next we have, I'll move the slide forward. Next we have Prof. Ellen Barbosa, the founder and current coordinator of the Laboratory of Computing Applied to Education and Advanced Social Technology at the University of Sao Paulo. So Ellen, it's great to have you here with us, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say. And I will invite you to take over, share your screen, and do your presentation now.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. We've got you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can see your screen clearly and can hear you clearly. Over to you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Ellen. I'm from Brazil. Here is 7 a.m., 7:30 a.m. So good morning for you, but good afternoon, good evening. Anyway, I will talk about computer science education with the work of a framework for experimental studies on the integration of software testing into programming education. This work is part of a PhD project conducted by Lilian Scatalon under my supervision. Before I start talking about our research, I want to talk a little bit about me. I'm from Brazil. I live in São Paulo State, in the middle of São Paulo State, in the city of São Carlos. I am associate professor in the Institute of Mathematics and Computer Science at the University of São Paulo. And my main research interests are software engineering together with computers and education. So we have another area which is called software engineering applied to education. Because of my research interests, I'm also founder, the current head of the Computer Applied to Education Lab, CAED Lab, and the former coordinator of the Software Engineering Labs. Here we have some pictures of our campus here in São Carlos, of our institute, and particularly in a sunny day, in a very sunny day here, right? So about our research. This is the agenda of my presentation. I will start with the context and motivations for our work. Then I will talk about empirical research process and the main aspects of our framework, the STEP framework, and our conclusions and perspectives for future work. Well, the context and motivation of our work is that when we deal with computer science education and education in general, there are many questions to be answered. For instance, how to evaluate the learning effectiveness, how to evaluate the students' performance, how to compare different teaching approaches, among several other questions. And to answer such questions, we need to conduct research studies. But if we analyze the studies that have been conducted in computer science education, we'll see that there is a lack of research rigor, there is a lack of theoretical basis, and most of the studies are very simple and very small experience reports. In a different but related perspective, we have the software engineering area, which involves the application of principles of engineering to develop, to operate, and to maintain software systems. And a sub-area of software engineering is experimental software engineering, which deals with experiments focusing on gathering evidences regarding the development of software systems, and through measurements and through conducting experiments, formal experiments. So if we analyze computer science education and software engineering, we'll see that both include technological and, most important, human aspects to develop software systems and to teach and learn in computer science. In software engineering, we have already conducted several research studies based on observation of human activities. So the same can be done in the area of computer science education. That's our idea, right? So we are talking about empirical research, which is the research based on observation. In fact, understanding software engineering and computer science education involves observation of human aspects too, reflection, model building, and experimentation. In the context of software engineering, we need to conduct experiments to understand how better develop software. And in the context of education and computer science education, we are interested in conducting experiments to understand how better educate students. In both cases, we have the human aspects, and this is very important. And this, for this reason, is important to conduct empirical research with more rigor, right? So how is the process of empirical research? It always starts with the research question. So a good research question should be interesting for the audience, for the community, should be answerable, should be repeatable, measurable, and appropriately scoped. So this is a key point, because we need to start with a good research question. Then, after having defined our research question, we need to select the adequate method. And here we understand a method as a set of principles around which empirical data is collected and analyzed. So the choice of the right method depends on access to resource, for instance, students or professionals as participants of our experiment, and how closely the method aligns with our research question that we have established, right? And depending on the method choose, we can conduct controlled experiments, more formal experiments. For instance, when we compare the effect of a new vaccine, now is in COVID-19, a new vaccine with a placebo. We can conduct quasi-experiments, a little bit less formal experiments. For instance, by introducing a new educational method, we want to measure the impact of this method with our students. And even less formal experiments by means of qualitative and quantitative analysis. For instance, by observing students to record their reaction to different types of educational approaches. Then, after having established the research, a good research question, the right method, we need to select the variables of our experiment. And this is not trivial. This is a very difficult activity, because we need to know very well the investigated domain. So the focus of our work is on selecting such variables. But what kind of variables? We need, when we are planning, designing an experiment, we need to think about the causes and the effects of our experiment. So the cause of the phenomenon we are observing is our input variables. So independent variables and context variables. And the effects we are trying to observe are the output variables, so the dependent variables, right? Since selecting variables is so difficult, we can use experimental frameworks to support, to help on this activity, on performing this activity. And an experiment framework is a domain-specific model that supports different experimental activities. And it's right here, our framework fits on. So a little bit about our framework. STEP means software testing in programming. So we are interested in design and conducting experiments in programming education, but trying to integrate software testing as a means to teach programming concepts, right? Dealing with programming education, we can use several different approaches. For instance, use pair programming, visualization, media computation, and in our case, we can use software testing. So the idea is that we can introduce software testing earlier in the process of teaching, and then the students will be able to improve their performance on programming by doing testing activities. But we need to conduct experiments to prove our ideas, right? To show that the software testing can be used together with programming concepts in this process of programming education, right? So the STEP framework, its structure is based on some seminal works, Basile, Gelles, and Williams' works. Its main elements, which are the variables, were defined based on the systematic mappings we have conducted, and also by analyzing some previous experiments we have performed. And then we have our framework. We are able to establish our framework. The framework has comprises two models. We have a goal model, which help us to define our research goal. And we have a variable model, which is a catalog of variables, and sometimes of metrics as well. So our goal model provides us a structure to establish the experiment goal. So we want to analyze a teaching method to integrate software testing for the purpose with respect to some learning outcomes, from the point of view of some perspective, in the context of some programming education context. Then this is a very general structure for designing our experiment, for defining our goal of the goal of the experiment. Then we have the variable model, which helps on defining the experiment variables. What kind of variable? Independent variable, context variable, and dependent variables. And this model is related to the goal model also, because the teaching method we intend to analyze, corresponds to our independent variables. The learning outcomes, we will observe its variations, are in the context of dependent variables. And the programming and education context refers to the context variables. So here we have our catalog of variables in the context of software testing into programming education, right? So we have a set of variables. For instance, we have here a set of independent variables, all of them related to software testing. So testing concepts, testing activities, tasks level, techniques, criteria, so on, some supporting tools. All of these variables can be selected. We can select some of them as input variables to our experiment, to the experiment we are planning. We also have here our context variables, all of them dealing with programming education. So the experience of the students regarding programming, regarding testing, or programming language, programming paradigm, undergraduate or graduate program. All these variables can be selected depending on the experiments as context variables, and they are also input to our experiment. And finally, we have the outcomes, the dependent variables, which are the output, which we will analyze to see the results of our experiments. So in terms of software testing and programming education, we can consider in terms of program, the size of the program that result, the activity of programming doing by the student. We can think about the code style, in terms of test, the size of test, the code coverage, and so on. So here we have a lot of variables that can be used when we are planning an experiment dealing with software testing into programming education, right? And we can do the same, we can apply the same idea for different domains also, defining such variables. The STEP framework can be applied in very different scenarios. So here we have some research questions regarding software testing applied to programming education. Then we choose one of this research question, the third one. So does the conduction of testing design by students influence on their programming performance? By applying our goal model, we have that what we want to analyze, the testing design task, for the purpose to evaluate with respect to students' program performance, behaviors, and perceptions from the point of view of the researcher in the context of introductory programming courses. So here we have defined the goal of the experiment we intend to design and to conduct. By using our variable model from the STEP framework, in the case of this experiment, we should select, in terms of independent variables, the testing tasks, in particular the design task, right? And we don't have any variation regarding programming language or programming paradigm or experience of the student, so we don't use any context variable in this experiment we are planning. And in the end, what we intend to analyze, the dependent variables in terms of the correctness of the program and the perceptions and behaviors of the students, right? So here we have an idea of which kind of variables to use to conduct our experiment. In terms of the experimental results, since we have test design as an independent variable, it can assume two values, test cases provided by the instructor and test cases written by students. We want to analyze these variations in terms of the students' performance when programming. And program correctness is the dependent variable And the metric here to analyze the program correctness is the pass rate of the student's code on instructor reference tests, right? In terms of the results, if we analyze the test cases provided by the instructor and the test cases written by students, we can see that the students, when the students are responsible for testing design, they went well in programming activities. So, of course, we need further experiments, but here we have a very simple example. When we design all the process of our experiment by using our framework and conduct this experiment by using our framework, right? To provide more rigor to our research studies in computer science education, right? So our conclusions here, we have worked with the establishment of the STEP framework for experimental studies on the integration of software testing into programming education. And we have conducted some experiments regarding testing design in order to apply the STEP framework. Of course, we need to conduct more experiments using the STEP framework. And this is the idea, is we are doing this right now. And of course, we evolve the framework based on these experiments, right? And we also intend to conduct a meta-analysis of the existing studies with the support of our framework, right? So this is a very brief overview of what we are doing. I think this presentation was a little bit different because we are talking about more technical concepts in the line of computer science education. But that's all, folks. And then I appreciate your time and patience, and thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. That was great. And let me find my reaction so I can do my hand clap. There we go. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So I'm looking at the chat for some questions. I'm looking at the participant list to see if anybody's hands up. It sometimes takes a few moments for people to pop them into the chat. While we wait for questions to come up, I've got one for you. So I like the idea of the STEP framework providing a structure for the studies that you're doing. But when I was looking at the variables that you were presenting and the variables that you were talking about, I noticed that there were a significant number of sort of quantitative type variables, but also there were perceptions, motivations, behaviors. You didn't talk at all about how you bring the qualitative and the quantitative together within this framework. I wonder if you could just talk to that for a few moments.
Okay. The idea of this framework is to deal with the quantitative variables, right? Because we have a lot of work dealing with qualitative data, right? This is good, but we need to something more rigorous to conduct our experiments. So I put the program correctness, for instance, which is quantitative, but we have a behavior and some qualitative aspects from the students, but we are not in the framework. We can collect some qualitative data, but we are interested in quantitative data because of the rigor of the experiment, right? And we have lots of work with qualitative experiments and analysis. And we need, in computer science, we need to prove with statistical basis, and we need quantitative data, right? But it's a good point. Both goes together. We need both types of experiments.
Well, thanks for that answer. Erd, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm actually trying to steal an idea or two on something that I have been trying to do for some time, since this is a kind of computer related. I actually tried to track the correlation between student participation and performance. And eventually, right now that we've gone online, one of the things that I've actually been trying to do is eventually track one of the parameters or variables that I've been trying to look at is, for example, what is the density of your clicks? By density of clicks, that means I can go at the background of my LMS and actually see how much student has been engaged with the material. But that seems kind of not. It doesn't tell me the story. In fact, for example, maybe going back to SJEE again, this was actually inspired from a paper that I read back in the days from SJEE that was trying to track how students worked before the night before a test or something back in the days. I can't remember exactly the details of this particular paper, but that was actually the idea, as to sometimes you just see a surge of activity online because something is upcoming. But how does it? How do you actually track a permanent pattern, and how do you basically monitor so that you can induce a bit more learning and eventually expect that you can have some engagement? But apparently, some people tend to see, and that is what I'm seeing, looking at, for example, the density of your click or engagement online does not show correlate exactly, but it's still maybe early to make any inference. I'm just trying to find out of curiosity, have you maybe have a similar thing or a similar engagement where you could actually look at something similar? Maybe that could be of assistance. I'm actually trying to steal an idea as to maybe a better kind of variables I can track in this particular investigation. Thank you.
Okay, this is an interesting point. I think we can use, we can define some variables to evaluate engagement. This is difficult. It's not a trivial task, but even in quantitative term way, you see a number of clicks, for instance, right? We can try to correlate this with engagement, with motivation, or attempts to do something, attempts to do a given exercise, for instance. We can try to extract some quantitative variables from this. But I think I've never saw something in this line, right? Although we can do this, and I think this is very interesting and very important, because we are used to evaluate engagement and motivations by qualitative analysis, by talking with the student, by asking the students to write something about their motivations and their engagement. But in quantitative terms, I think it would be much more interesting for us. But I have never saw something like this. For instance, at least for me, for our research, we are not dealing with this, but this is very important, and I think it's a good research line to be investigated.
Thanks for your question, Erd, and thanks for that comprehensive answer. Looking at the chat, there's a question here that's saying, has this framework, your STEP framework, been taken up by other colleagues in computer science education, or is it mostly currently being used by your units pushing this framework?
We are doing this with several colleagues, right? because to extract, to collect these variables, we had analyzed several experiments previously conducted by several different groups. Of course, groups dealing with computer science education, with programming education, right? And we also analyzed several works from the literature, from a systematic mapping we have conducted. But of course, we know that there are a lot of variables that are not contemplated in our framework, right? And that's why we need to conduct more experiments dealing with programming education and introducing software testing in programming education, to collect more data and evolve our framework to be more complete. But we are working together, several groups, to define this framework, right? But it's not complete, and it will be very difficult to be completed someday, but we'll try.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. We got a question from Maggie. It's sort of adjacent to the framework itself. So she says here, I have always integrated software applications into assignments such as Excel, Aspen, CAD, MS Project, etc., from first year all the way through to honors level. Some students find it challenging when they have to interrogate the results constructively and then write a discussion. So they find challenges when they have to interrogate the results and then constructively and write the discussion. This is a difficult trait to develop in our students. Can you comment on that possibly?
I lost the end of your question. The connection is, can you repeat, please? Only the end.
Sure. So he's talking about the challenges that students have when they interrogate the results and then have to write a discussion. And she says that it's difficult to develop these abilities in students. Are you able to comment on that?
Right. Sometimes we use the feedback provided by the students to improve the materials and to improve the classes in order to make them better understand the programming activity, right? But when they use their own experience, it's much interesting. For instance, we have some testing tools, and we put the students to work with these testing tools earlier in the programming activities, right? So they are programming and they are testing their own program, and the testing tool provides them some feedback about testing cases they are designing. And when they saw why their programs are not so good because testing cases failed, okay, we need to improve our process of programming, right? So we try to use this when we are teaching programming, and try to make the students understand how to program by using the testing feedback, right? And even by using the teacher feedback, of course, but the feedback provided by the tool is much more interesting for them. There's no way. When we talk with the students, it's different from, okay, I see in our testing tool we are wrong or we are right. It's different, right?
Great, thank you very much. I don't see any. So Debbie says, that reminds me of how valuable peer assessment is in helping students to become critical thinkers. Thanks for that, Debbie. I don't see any other comments here or any other hands up in the chat. So Ellen, thank you so much for your presentation today. It's one of those ones that makes us think, and that's such an important part of the process that we go through. Right, welcome back from lunch, everybody. It's great to have you all here. It gives me great pleasure to be able to welcome our next plenary speaker, and that is Professor John Mitchell. So John is a Professor of Communication Systems Engineering in the Department of Electronic and Electrical Engineering at University College London. And he's going to talk to us today on evaluating curriculum development activities. Right, John, over to you.
Thank you very much. So yes, thank you so much for the invite. Delighted to both be speaking here and to be involved in the journal and its launch. I think it's a really important and really valuable initiative. I've worked with Brandon and Zach and Jenny and others that are here, and Leilani and Helen, looking at with some of the programs we've run in South Africa, particularly, and I think and discussions about it expanding that, and it's I think something we're very keen to offer our support, particularly in my role as the co-director of the Centre for Engineering Education at UCL. So a centre that both is looking for internal development, and very interested to hear some of the talks this morning, but also how we can share our experience and support others, particularly in curriculum development. So I've taken a focus of curriculum development, both from the activities of developing an institutional-wide curriculum reform, but also going to draw on some of the experience that hopefully I won't put Bruce off even in his first days in the job of as a 2.5 years as a journal editor, as editor-in-chief for the IEEE transactions on education, and say a little bit about some of the sort of reflections on the, I think it's probably just over 1,000 papers in the last 2.5 years that have crossed my desk, and those that have ended up in review and those that sadly go straight off the end of the desk into the waste paper basket, and what it is that we should be thinking about as we're doing the curriculum review to help ensure that we are not only making impactful changes in our curriculum, but also that we give ourselves the best opportunity to disseminate them. So it is a disclaimer. I hope there's some insight. I know there's a lot of experience on this call from people I see. I know hopefully this will be obvious to some, but I'm hopefully not obvious to all. And certainly I have to admit many of these things weren't obvious to me when I started. So hopefully there's some experience I can share. So a few of the things really stood out when we were engaged in curriculum review, and this particular one was something that I think we would have missed if we'd not picked it up. I think it was actually Ruth Graham who pointed this out to me when we were doing some of our early investigation work. Often curriculum reform comes about because of a crisis, because of a need to change, or some other opportunity that comes up. And actually taking a moment to take stock and characterizing the baseline that you start from is something that's often missed in many of these projects. I think it's often a reason why much of the curriculum development we see, particularly widespread curriculum development, isn't well documented afterwards. But to get that snapshot of where you are, because once you start changing things, you'll never get it back. And actually, we're now finding it's really been very useful to have some of that data, particularly, we're 7 years on from the changes being made. We've got new staff coming in and staff who've forgotten some of the reasons we made the change, to be able to go back and support the reasons for the change and what it was before and why we've made the changes that we made. And so, thinking of that baseline and how you're going to characterize what it is that is the situation in your institution at the time you start the curriculum reform. And particularly in a way that also ties into this second point of thinking about what it is that other models you're going to apply. Now, thinking about your approach and thinking about your outcomes. Now, I think this stands very much, whether it's at an individual level of an individual module or a much more widespread reform, thinking about what it is that, and the reasoning and the justification for some of the models that you're going to apply. certainly in the midst of doing the curriculum change, being able to justify the reasoning was important, as well as, you know, one of the things that often we get back from reviewers of papers is there's a sort of a little bit of a disconnect between, you know, maybe a problem is stated, but well, why is this innovation come about? What is the reason for this particular innovation? And I must admit, I see it most, I think, with some of the problem-based learning and project-based learning approaches, in that you get a stock. People have said problem-based learning is good. We've therefore applied it to this module type approach, in particularly a lot of the practitioner-led papers that come in. And so understanding that, I think, is both important when you try and publish it and write it up, but also important to bring colleagues along with you when you try and develop these programs, of understanding what it is that you're changing, what it is you want to achieve by that change. And particularly pertinent for the topic here of being able to evaluate it, having a very clear statement of what it is that you want the students to do. We saw Kirkpatrick's four layers earlier. Those sorts of models are really useful in thinking about how you what you're trying to change within that within this framework to move towards an evaluation framework at the end. So being clear on both the approaches and the outcomes, I find, is very important, and articulating them clearly when you come to publish what it is that you've been trying to do. Now this is probably maybe a more contentious one in terms of me being critical about the papers that I see, but a lot of what we see and what reviews badly, you get a feeling that the evaluation was something of an afterthought, that it was we've done something, often for a very good reason, and put models in, put innovations in, but not thought so much in that in the process of doing them about how to evaluate it. And so leading on from that curriculum design, thinking about objectives that are measurable. If we have a really good picture of what it is we want to achieve and what we want to see change in our curriculum, actually as part of that design process, think about, and we talk about, you know, smart objectives, these sort of things, that they are measurable objectives that we're creating. And no, I wouldn't want to go into too much detail here. I know there's a lot of experience as to what those approaches might be, pre-post tests, control groups. Sometimes that can work well. Sometimes there's slightly more ethical dilemmas about doing such things that you need to evaluate. Interviews, focus groups, talking with staff, students, talking with industry, getting industry to help with the evaluation, particularly if what you're trying to achieve is a major change to meet industry objectives or accreditation objectives. Involve those stakeholders in the evaluation. They're a very important voice. We can you know, grades, the assessments that you do anyway can well be used. Although, again, that's another often contentious issue in some papers. If you say the grades went up, well, but often you find, well, the assessment has subtly changed as well. Is that really a direct measure of some sort of change? So I think you have to be a little bit careful. One I don't see used so much in engineering education, but we found is a really powerful and very useful measure, is observations. Pick criteria for student activities and observe the students. I think that's one that's not transferred from the social sciences quite as much into engineering education, but can be a really powerful tool, particularly in, you know, if you're looking at teamwork activities and many of the things that we want in problem-based learning. And also think from the beginning how you might engage people in longitudinal studies. And I say this one from very painful experience of, this was a bit of an afterthought for us. We knew we should do longitudinal studies, but trying to encourage students back into longitudinal studies partway through is a painful process. If you can you know, get students on board to the studies early on, that can be very powerful. You will note I don't sort of say so much about SEQs and student surveys, because I think they can be very useful as part of a mixed mode study. and I think many of our studies are going to be mixed mode in this type of activity. But a lot of the papers that I get, and the IEEE Transactions on Education has a specific criteria in its scope that evidence must go beyond student self-report, because thinking about how you're going to rigorously demonstrate the effective learning, actually student self-report, although a component of it, does not in itself necessarily demonstrate that an effectiveness in learning has taken place. And so while they probably should be on the list, they do come with a big caution. And the last two I think are very particular for authors of journal publications, and again things that we're seeing, I see from the papers coming across my desk. Be honest about your limitations. Again, this is something that we don't, perhaps it's an engineering discipline thing that in social sciences it's much more common to see very long limitation sections and really grounding the theory in what it can, the study in what it can and can't show and exactly where it's placed. I think certainly in my own discipline we tend to be a bit bolder about our claims of a new technology, and that often goes through to our education. And it's guaranteed to be picked up by the reviewers when a statement like this shows that PBL is an effective method for teaching semiconductor circuits. You say, well, does it really? Does the data really support these sort of very bold statements? And there's nothing wrong about being honest and actually documenting the constraints in which you work. And so I think that's important. And the other one that's becoming much more important, and this is very context specific, but I think the US is shifting this way, the UK is shifting this way of really looking at the ethics of any study with human participants. I say this particularly because I've just finished a quite strange one it was actually a paper that was using facial recognition of students during proctored exams. And I went to look at the ethics statement, and there was a question about, does it have human participants in it? And the response was, no, it's students, which I thought was possibly one of the most bizarre comments I've seen on an ethics submission for a journal. And I think, again, it's something we may not think coming from engineering backgrounds, but again, the social sciences are much more attuned to. And I think something the IEEE is certainly pushing, and I know many publishers are driving our concerns of the ethical approach to data, using student data, and how we both collect and deliver it, and something that we should be attuned to. So just to finish off, I wanted to say a little bit about the program we did here and give a couple of examples of some of the studies that we've done. So the IEP was a process to really try and change the way we teach across all the disciplines at UCL, all the engineering disciplines, bringing in inclusivity, a theme of authentic engineering practice, so project-based learning and design and professional practice right from the beginning, and link our disciplinary strengths into our research across all the BEng and MEng degrees, which I can't compete with Leilani for 1,700 students. We only had 1,083 on our project-based learning course that covers all the disciplines at the beginning of the course. But we decided this was something that all our new first years would take part in. So previously we had our very distinct different disciplines, and what the IEP really does is puts in threads that connect them together, as well as a vertical thread of project-based activities. So we have a challenges module, a project-based learning module that starts from the beginning, supported by a taught theme of design and professional skills, a maths program that's very scenario-based, and then we stop our curriculum for week-long periods where students take on projects as they go through. And so, give you an idea of some of the things. The maths course is now very much driven around different engineering scenarios to teach aspects of maths, and we have this thread of projects that runs right the way through the curriculum, from some longer projects at the beginning to these week-long scenarios. I always wind my colleague up who drew this about the fact that it's not a good engineering diagram, it's not to scale. I mean, the discipline and technical part is still 80% of the program. But in one respect, it's not to scale in a technical sense, but it is in a bit of an emotional sense, that it's this thread of projects that ties everything together, and the students see as a really core central theme of what they're doing. From the challenges through to a program we call How to Change the World, a 2-week interdisciplinary program at the end, where the students take on wicked problems that they, it's not the first thing they have to do is define the problem brief. They're not given a task to do. And then so that hopefully gives you a bit of an idea of what we've done, and as I say, the theme of these projects where students take on these quite intensive 1-week challenges. This is one that we use, one of the IMEC challenges, and over 2 of those sections, students design and then build and test these little robots. Others are much more industry linked, directly linked to industry projects, or directly linked to our research activities. And this has given us a wealth of things that we could investigate, evaluate, and a lot of things that we need to get data on and collect data on. So just to give a couple of examples of some of the things that we've done. So one of the big questions that came up was, how will our students adapt to teamwork? Will they understand the process of being in a team? I think we certainly saw some pushback from some of the students when they first joined the course. I remember going in the first few weeks to one of the feedback sessions and banging on the table of, I came to UCL to study engineering, to do maths and hard science. I didn't come to do teamwork and write reports and these sort of things. This is not what engineering's about. And so we wanted to understand a lot more about what our students thought of teamwork, and were they valuing the things and getting out of that teamwork process the things that we wanted to. And so to give you an idea of one method of doing this that we found quite interesting, and it was useful that we designed the evaluation at the same time we were designing some parts of the program, was there was a process where we knew we'd have to do some form of peer assessment and get our students to assess what it was, how the teams were functioning. And I think it was Kate who's on this paper came up with this rather nice idea of, well, there's a 5-point rubric that students will use to assess to assess their teams, but we will actually get the students to write that rubric. We gave them, I think it might have been 30 different topics they could choose to form their own rubrics, and the teams would have to agree what were they going to value. And a few things we found that actually that conversation was a very useful conversation with the teams, for them to not just put a bunch of stuff down or use our own rubrics to understand how they were working as a team, but to really discuss and with the team how they were going to work together. But also it gave us a good evaluation point for us to code and to analyze what students were valuing in their teamwork, how they saw the teams the teams function, and what they thought were going to be the important aspects of working in a team. And so that was, I think, quite a nice example of one where the evaluation and the setup came together as a process of both something that was educationally very good, but also gave an interesting evaluation point for the process. The second one I just wanted to mention was about one of the project-based learning activities, where, and this was a use of observation and an interview. And so this was some colleagues from the IOE, who was presented in Cape Town at the REEN conference, of looking at, I think what is often a question that staff ask about project-based learning is, I think staff see that it's obviously a very useful technique for teaching skills. Students learn to do things, but is knowledge being created as well? Can we see the technical learning outcomes also coming through and being improved in problem-based learning? And I think, some previous studies, I've seen many that use exams at the end, actually tend to show that it, often doesn't improve their technical knowledge when measured by an exam, but that doesn't feel like the right instrument to be testing this. And so this was really trying to observe the way students addressed the problems, how they took on and look at the problem-solving approaches they were using by having people observe the groups as to how they interact, how they formulated their designs, and the discussions they were having. And I think this brought up some, really interesting things from the observations, and also the opportunity to then question the students on, well, why did you do that? Why did your team pick on those sorts of things? As a very useful evaluation tool. So I think my time is coming towards the end. I just wanted to, a few examples from some of the things we've done, and also hopefully some things to think about. If the type of work you're doing is this sort of practitioner-led curriculum development, we've certainly had to learn from some of our mistakes, and I think if you can bear in mind some of these aspects as you're designing studies, as well as writing them up, hopefully that some of these observations will be useful to you for both studies you might be designing, as well as the papers you come to submit out of these initiatives. So thank you very much.
John, thanks so much. I'm trying to find my reaction to give a clap. There we go. That's my clap. Hopefully others will be doing the same thing. So Jenny's rubbing her hands together. So she's clapping in real time. There we go. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm looking at the participants to see if any hands up. I see Nicholas has put a question in the chat, and it might have been focused at a particular point in your presentation, saying use of solo taxonomy with a question mark. So maybe you want to just talk to solo as a principled approach, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that. I mean, you can apply all sorts of taxonomies and structures. I think there are certainly people who did it within it. I think one of the things about doing a process across a number of departments, a lot of the approaches were tailored to the individual departments and leveraging on how they wanted to feed. I think that was quite an interesting sort of subtlety of this, in that it was very much a top-down push to get momentum, but a bottom-up approach of how different people addressed it. And so I think our chemical engineers, if I remember, took solo on. It's something I've used in the past, but also it is something that I think different groups engage with it in different ways. Some find I think particularly those that, some practitioners particularly have found it slightly awkward to engage with. So I think, you have to test the ground, and whatever, sometimes it's very formal structures are a very good way for people to address curriculum change. Others, it tends to be a little bit more. You need to be a little more subtle in the approaches that you use.
Great, thanks. So while we wait for other questions to pop up, I've got one for you. The one thing that was on one of your slides that I reacted to, and it's very true what you said there, is that you need to only use data for what it was intended, and then you gave an example of the ethics approval request, saying there was no human subjects involved in the study. So I've got a colleague of mine who's in the room at the moment, actually, who went back to some old data that they had collected from quite a long time back, and mined it, and came up with some really useful things to say. And it wasn't what the data was originally intended for. There were some really insightful things that emerged from it, and actually ended off on an important research journey for this person. And I'm just wondering about the tension that this places on us as researchers when we've got some really good interview data.
I think it is
slightly tangential. So
I mean, I think it's a big problem these days. I mean, so we are pushed with ethics approvals now, and particularly, I guess it depends on the type of data. I think it is particularly when you're getting into any sort of sensitive data regarding students, and often we don't. But certainly our ethics boards are pushing us that, you have a consent form with the students, you have to inform them as to what your what you're doing with that data, and there are limits on what you can then go on to do with. Now, it does apply to certain data types more than other data types. So yeah, certainly I wasn't flagging that as a broad, well, once you've collected it for one thing, that's all you can do with it. But it is just something to be conscious of, that more and more ethics committees are saying, you know, if you, particularly if you're doing studies that require informed consent, you can't then, you know, there are problems of using data elsewhere. And I must admit, I'm torn on it. I can see, you know, privacy arguments as to why that's done, but also it is, you know, good research doesn't always know exactly where it was going to head when it started out. Actually, that's the joy of many good pieces of research, that you see things open up as you're exploring the data and new opportunities come up. And it, you know, I think, you know, as Jenny says in the chat, these things are evolving, and I think they're still settling down in some respects. And I hope we can get to a place where we can be, you know, be appropriately mindful of people's privacy, but also not stifle innovation in research. But it's a difficult balance.
Yeah, thanks. So Mailani, who's known as iPad to some, are there some critical themes that came out from your interviews with students on PJBL learning, except your comments on teamwork?
I think there are. I think there, the students generally engage with it very well. They generally, there's a balance. Not all see the value of it. I think one of the follow-up pieces we did with that was looking at authenticity, and whether students were looking at how students felt about the types of problems, and we put a lot of work in to try and make them authentic. And I think one of the most interesting things that came out of it was that actually what mattered most is not that they were authentic, but that students felt they were authentic. And actually one of the ones that got the most pushback from students was something that came directly from one of our colleagues and an industry partner. And it was probably in real terms, the most authentic thing that we actually did, but the students didn't believe it. It didn't feel authentic to them. They didn't think industry would work like this, and so they took it as a fake problem, which I think is very interesting as to what particularly for industry engagement with programs, as to how you make sure I saw a discussion earlier about that intrinsic motivation, and I think part of the reason for the authenticity is to gain that intrinsic motivation in the students, that this is a real problem to engage with, but it needs to feel real to them, which has some subtle differences to actually being real.
Yeah, that's very true. So Sally is asking, what was the main reason for your course changes?
Oh, there's all sorts of different answers I could offer to that. I think, I mean, we didn't have a crisis. There was no one looking over our shoulder saying, there's something wrong, you've got to improve, or there wasn't anything necessarily that drove that. We had a dean who had he'd gone to the global engineering deans convention, I think in Chicago, and come back buoyed, having met Rick Miller and people, and and one Sunday afternoon sent out an email saying we need to change the way. I think it was a growing pressure from some industry partners, from our students, saying that they felt the course was a bit dry. They want, alumni coming back. So I think there were subtle pressures. I think there were also, in at least a few departments, pressures that people wanted to try new things and were feeling stifled and wanted, felt they could do better things. And so I think it was a sort of coming together of some internal and external pressure. Certainly there were a number of departments that had made some advances, but I think you get to a point, and I got to this point within my own department, where you can put in little islands of things, but there comes to a point where you think the next step has got to be to join them up, and there's got to be that broader curriculum reform. Finding gaps and putting good stuff in, was really useful to us, because we had some precedent, we had some pilot, things we could call pilots where people had tried things, but there's only so much you can do that. And I think we got that point where there were a few departments that felt there was a step change needed, and so it was a combination of things. And I think that that's possibly the hardest thing, that it's very hard, I think, to do it with just, you know, I think if a dean comes in and says they want to change it without enough enthusiasts to change it, you know, there's, I've talked about the stars aligning. I think we were lucky that there were a number of different pressure factors that added up to enough pressure to cause momentum.
Thanks, John. Cecilia, I hope that answers your question. Renee, I see your hand is up. Please, over to you.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, John.
Renee.
Nice to see you. I'm one of your editors on IEEE transactions. I'm wanting to talk to ask my question in that kind of context as a reviewer. And I'm always interested in, I know that your talk here was in the context of project-based learning and the kinds of papers that people are writing. I think as a reviewer and as a researcher, I always get a little bit twitchy when I see control group in the context of educational research. And, you know, we are, for me, a control and experiment is a laboratory situation, and your students are not, it's not possible to control variables in the way that one does in a lab. And a lot of the papers that I certainly have seen come in across my desk as reviewer are those kinds of things where people are making claims for, this is the control group, we didn't do anything there, and in this class we did the, and I'm just wanting to, you know, that combined with the idea of using theory, a more kind of theory of a theory lens, which is not really, and it's not there in the review criteria for the journal. Now, I appreciate that it's maybe a particular kind of journal, but just to maybe get your view on that. You were talking every now and then, you mentioned the social sciences, which probably uses a slightly different lens, different research methodologies. But what about this idea that a lot of educational research sometimes, because it comes from the engineering and the harder sciences, people write papers that make claims about the success of an intervention, try to generalize and, you know, turn numbers of 30s into percentages and that kind of thing, if you know what I mean.
I know, yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's what I was trying to get to with that limitations point, that, you know, be honest about what your paper does and doesn't do. And I know you've seen them, and a lot come past where, you know, that is true. Yeah, I mean, I think your point on control groups is absolutely right. There are, and probably up until before I was a journal editor, I would have said I wouldn't advocate for control groups, and I think I certainly would stick by that. I think there are some, I've seen it used well, but it's actually in problem-based learning type activities, it's not I don't think it is appropriate, definitely, for most types of things. I mean, the problem with control groups are always that, yeah, as you say, there's too many variables to control. I mean, you would never do an experiment where you change so many variables. You know, I've seen people where they do, you know, a program taught in a classroom, taught in problem-based learning with different types of assessment and try and compare them. And you think, you know, that's a completely uncomparable experiment, really. You know, no one changes all the parameters of the experiment and then compares the things, unless you're doing university rankings where it seems to be acceptable to change the way of doing it every year and then compare the difference. But I think yeah, I mean, so I think what I was trying to highlight was that there are lots of different things. I do think there is this interesting discussion, and you know, I hope Bruce will join us. There's a little group of journal editors that meet up at various conferences, at SJEE, at REEN, at various different things, and sort of chew the fat on the issues that are taxing us. And it's interesting how there is a bit of a spectrum between those that align themselves rather more with the social sciences and those that align them more with the sort of engineering come social science sort of end of the spectrum. And I think full well that IEEE probably comes a little at one end and JEE's a bit at the other, and there's a few in the middle. And I guess Bruce will have to decide where the SJEE sits itself. So I think that is a big question, and I think but I do think it is an onus on us to try and increase that within the publications that come in, because that theoretical lens not being present, I think, is one of the most problematic aspects we see of many papers.
Thanks, John. Does anybody have any other questions that they'd like to ask John? I don't see any hands up at the moment. Anybody want to unmute their mic and ask a question? Kem, I see your mic is unmuted. Is there a question that you're wanting to ask? No, not at this stage. John, in that case, it's time for me to thank you very much for your presentation. Yeah. It's certainly stimulated some conversation, and as Bruce says in the chat, he looks forward to chewing the fat with you at presentations at conferences in the future.
Well, we're all hoping to be in Perth, but maybe.
Yeah, that's a bit unfortunate that we are still in a COVID space, and it looks like the Australians seem to be locking down quite significantly at the moment. Right, everyone, that takes us now to messages of support. What we've got is we've got some messages of support for the launch of the journal from a variety of different sources. Before we move to the ones that I've got on the screen at the moment, I'm going to hand over to Renee, who's the director of the Center for Research in Engineering Education at UCT, and she wanted to provide some words of encouragement. So over to you, Renee.
Thank you, Brandon. No, my message is just about congratulations to Bruce and to the editorial board. This has been a wonderful event, and just congratulations on the event today. It was a good time. Our time in the breakout, my one complaint is the time in the breakout rooms were too short, and we sort of very quickly got booted out, but maybe we can now use this. Just from CREE at UCT, the Center for Research in Engineering Education, we just wanted to express our congratulations and our huge support for this venture. We will be enthusiastically behind you, and we're thinking of ways in which we can almost have a compulsory contribution from our members. And also just to maybe say, watch out, we've got a CREE event in September to pull together the engineering education research community. So watch out for that. We'd love to interact, but just huge congratulations and massive support for the journal. And we look forward to good relationships in future.
Renee, thanks very much. So now what we've got REEN, AAEE, AEEA, and IFES. So the Research in Engineering Education Network, REEN, we're going to hand over to Shannon. Shannon, I saw you in the audience earlier. I'm hoping you're still around and you can...
I'm here.
Wonderful. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm here on behalf of REEN today to just welcome this new journal and to have a chance to reconnect with all of you all for a brief part of the day. I first heard about the possibility of this journal at REES 2019 in Cape Town, and Bruce organized that event. I'm sure a lot of you here helped support that event and attended it. And I just, was so impressed with the high level of engagement and the great quality of that event. And, and also the remarkable connections that were made between the global REES community and SJEE, that connections that I'm still working with today. on a daily basis working with people in South Africa, which, you know, as a native Virginian, I wasn't expecting that to be part of my life, although Jenny is living in my hometown now. But I want to say that the quality of that event and this event today was so incredibly high. And also the master classes that I got to take part in South Africa that Brandon Collier-Reid was spearheading with other colleagues who were here. These were just amazing events, and I have every confidence in the world that this journal is just going to be top notch and really bring some great and very necessary insight to the dialogue that's going on globally about engineering education, how to do research, and how we can make our efforts in education stronger. So I do want to say that although I'm the REEN chair, we have a lot of REEN board members who are participating here today. Teresa Hatting from South Africa is the current vice chair, incoming chair of REEN. We also have Shenyang Du, who spoke today, and John Mitchell, who serves as our resource curator. And then, of course, Esther Matimba, Mike Clausen, and Sally Mail, who are also on our board. So we're very well represented here, trying to support your event and learn from all you have to teach us. Our goal on the Research and Engineering Education Network is to grow the EER community globally, to help build capacity for people to do EER and to help raise the quality and the visibility of the work that we're doing, the research we're doing. So it's really great to have a new journal here. And hopefully I'll take just a minute more to tell you that we are doing some specific capacity building activities. One is capacity building in Africa. This is led by Esther Matamba from REEN, but also Lilani Smith from the South African side, and Mike Clausen and Ida Guerra. So we'll be using that work that they've been doing successfully as a model for building capacity in other areas of the globe as well. I want to say that the special focus issue that we put out as a result of the last REEN, it'll be published in hard copy soon. We've been working very closely with Sally to get that produced, and we served as the editors for that. And we have people here today who were authors, Alison Gwynn Evans and Maggie Chetty. So you have work from South Africa presented as a headline. And then I'll wrap up just by saying, keep your eyes open. We'll be test piloting soon a series of EER workshops to help people who are interested in starting out in EER. We'll be doing these online, trying to, get people in various parts of the globe access to our community. So thanks so much. Welcome, Bruce. Thanks for taking this on. Can't wait to see this. And I'm going to dig up some old articles and see if I have something that is fitting your vision. I think I might. Thanks, Brandon, too.
Wonderful. Shannon, thank you so much for your words of encouragement and support. We're going to move on now to the Australasian Association for Engineering Education, the AAEE, and the name has been mentioned before. Sally, over to you. Small community.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful event. It's been a fabulous launch of a journal that I know will be equally fabulous. I've really enjoyed the presentations. I'd like to acknowledge, because I'm the editor-in-chief of the Australasian Journal of Engineering Education, which is the journal of the Australasian Association for Engineering Education, I really recognise and would like to applaud the effort that I know will have already gone into this journal by SJEE. And I know that it will be a lot of work continuing. And I'd like to go back to Bruce's mention at the very start of the idea that it felt for him like a marriage. When you're at a marriage, of course, one of the things is that the congregation is invited to declare their support to support the success of the married life of the couple. And I hope that, in fact, I know that I'm not speaking alone when I say that it's been a pleasure to be here as part of the international community, and in particular coming from Australasia, but part of an international community and the community of journal editors who I know will be wishing the journal every success as part of a congregation in the engineering education field, submitting papers and reviewing papers and supporting the journal in every other way that we can. I also wanted to say that I'm absolutely delighted with the name, the Global South, and the intention to be focusing on critical diverse perspectives represented in that title. If we go back to the very start, we had Christine Winberg drawing our attention to the idea that the whole system influences what we do, and while we might do engineering education research with the goal of disrupting engineering education for society, as Jenny talked about, there was discussion in at the end of Jenny's presentation about how we're influenced by not necessarily needing funding, because our research might not cost that much, aside from time, which of course is very expensive. But we are influenced by other factors. For a researcher to be able to spend time on research, they'll often be incentivized by the need to survive. And in academia, that might mean the need to be able to publish, and for diverse research to be published, especially from critical perspectives, it's really valuable that we have an addition to the diversity of the research community, especially of the research journals, the places we can publish, especially focusing on critical perspectives. And that means that as readers, we will have the opportunity to read very diverse papers with critical views that will open our minds to things, not only questioning assumptions, as Jenny said, that we might be that might be assumptions that are out there that we would like to question, but assumptions that are hidden, the assumptions that are not seen because they might be the perspectives of those who are not part of the dominant writers. So congratulations. I wish you all the best, and we look forward to supporting you in this endeavour. I think it's extraordinarily valuable.
Wonderful. Thank you for those words of encouragement, and also for keeping the marriage metaphor going. Next up, we have the African Engineering Education Association, the AEEA, and we have Funso Falade, who is going to be able to give us some words of encouragement for the journal. Funso, are you online at the moment?
I saw him earlier, Brandon, but I'm not sure if he's in the room at the moment.
Yeah, I did see him earlier. Okay, so he might be able to pop in again just near the end. So what we'll do is we'll move on then to IFES. Now, the IFES is a recorded message by Dr. Hans Hoyer, and he sent us a video a little while back. And what I've done is I've tried to integrate it into the presentation. So I've never done this before, and hopefully it'll work. So we'll see whether I can play the video as anticipated. So here goes.
It is my pleasure to send my warm greetings and congratulations to my friends and colleagues throughout South Africa and beyond on the launch of the Southern Journal of Engineering Education for your symposium of SJEE. IFES, the organization that works globally and very closely with all of you in South Africa and throughout the world, is very, very honored, very pleased that we are close partners, friends, colleagues that share experiences, the research that we do, not only within the African context, but globally. And in my leadership role, working so closely with many friends in South Africa and beyond, it's a pleasure to learn about this important symposium that you are hosting. I'm sure it will be intellectually very engaging and rewarding, and bringing together your community. I wish I could be there in person with you, and I certainly hope to be in South Africa next year for our WEAF IFES GDC conference, and I hope to be able to share the experience next year with you in Cape Town and with the entire South African community. Many, many thanks for giving me the opportunity to greet you, and I wish you much success and enjoyment in this symposium that you're sharing and experiencing. Thank you very, very much.
Great, thanks very much to Hans. It's nice to see him, nice to have the video working. Right, everyone, that brings us to the end of what has been a very, very exciting morning for Bruce and his team, the editorial team, which is Bruce, myself, Maggie, Johnson, and Karen. Thank you so much for being with us today. What I hope that you've seen with the presentations that were made today, you see the sorts of things that we are interested in considering for publication in this journal. I think it was Sally which spoke quite critically about the importance of having that critical view on what's happening in the South, and we really are open to submissions. We're open to people having a chat with us and seeing whether what they're thinking of is appropriate. We will work with you. As Bruce has mentioned earlier, we're in the honeymoon stage at the moment. We're hoping that all of you are going to come to the party and submit your articles for our consideration. We're going to be running review workshops. We're going to really do what we can to help sort of grow the community of education scholars, of engineering education scholars in the South. And we're going to be working with our partners, as we've heard some of the other international organizations do similar kinds of things. So we're partnering with them as we sort of capacitate, although I don't like that word, I think it's fitting. We're going to capacitate the people in the sector to really grow and sort of thrive as an engineering education community. I hope you've enjoyed the opportunity to see each other, to hear from each other, and to engage with us. We certainly are going to take this idea forward, the idea that we can put opportunities together for us as a community to be able to speak to each other. I think we do that all too rarely at the moment. And actually, in the modern way of communicating, it's so easy to do. There's no reason why we can't come together for half an hour every now and again, or an hour, and have these sorts of conversations. So Bruce, thank you for all the effort that you've taken in keeping this going, bringing it all together, and actually making it happen. We're open for business. Please send us your papers. Right, and with that, I want to say thank you for joining us today, and we will see you all again soon.